Hello everyone. You are listening Darkwood Tales podcast, and I am here to tell you true deep wood stories. Close your eyes and enjoy. The forest seemed to close ranks, hemming me in like prey. At first, I thought it was the dusk playing tricks on my eyes. Shadows thickening unnaturally, bark knotting in twisted shapes that hadn't been there minutes before, and the wind retreating as though it feared to breathe too loud. But it wasn't just a feeling. The trees' long, gray-limbed pines tangled with sagging oaks and fevered vines were moving, if only by inches, their branches subtly curling inward like fingers weaving a cage. I felt it in the pressure behind my ears, in the tightening of my skin, in the way every sound grew louder. The moment I stopped walking, it was as if the silence wanted something from me. I should have turned back. The trail I followed had no name, just a faint break in the moss and needles. No signposts, no markers, nothing left by people who cared whether you made it back. Cumberland Island was always strange. Even on the maps, Duskwater, they called this part. Though no one could tell me exactly when it got that name, only that it had never left the paper, like a birthmark on the land. Locals refused to speak about it for long. One whispered, "You go out there. You better leave a part of yourself tied to the mainland." I had laughed then. Now, it seemed less a warning than a condition of entry. My boots pressed into the damp, loamy floor with an unpleasant squelch, the earth spongy beneath layers of rotting leaf litter. The scent of decay rose in warm gusts, mushrooms and mildew. Something coppery underneath, like blood scraped clean from old rust. Every so often, I would hear something move beyond the tree line, never near enough to see, always too deliberate to be wind. A sharp snap of twigs, the slow drag of something heavy against bark, a single wet breath drawn in too close and never exhaled. I told myself it was just the forest being alive. But even the birds had gone quiet. I had entered before sundown, maybe an hour before twilight touched the tops of the trees, and already I was unsure how long I had been walking. My watch, which had ticked in its normal cadence back at camp, now clicked just slightly off rhythm, as if each second hesitated before committing. Time felt elastic, stretching and thinning like old taffy, threatening to snap. The path I followed wound deeper into thick underbrush, and I no longer remembered when the light had truly changed. It was dim now, but not with night. More as though the woods themselves refused to reflect light properly, drawing it into the soil and letting nothing escape. My name is John. Or it was, at least, before the mist came. I don't remember how long I stood at the edge of the clearing, where the trees leaned back, just enough to reveal a hunched figure of stone nestled in the dirt. It was no more than waist-high, overgrown and gnarled with moss, but unmistakably shaped, arched back, elbows tucked, a head bowed low as if in eternal prayer or shame. Its surface was etched with lines that hadn't eroded. Despite the passage of time, I didn't recognize the script. It wasn't Latin, wasn't Greek. wasn't anything I'd seen in all my years cataloging archaic glyphs for the university. That should have thrilled me once, but not now. Now the sight of it sent a cold ripple down my spine, like water flowing uphill. A strange mist swirled around the monument, thicker than the fog I'd passed through earlier, denser and colder, almost wet to the touch. It clung to my boots, licked at my fingers. When I stepped closer, I felt the world shift beneath me, not visibly, not physically, but perceptibly. I was still standing upright, and yet I felt as though I were falling forward, as if some unseen cliff had opened beneath my body, and I was toppling silently into the dark. The sensation made my stomach lurch, and I staggered back with a strangled gasp, trying to will the forest to return to normal, trying to believe in things like gravity and balance and rules. But they didn't apply here. I know that now. The breathing started then. It wasn't mine. That's the part that stuck. I'd been panting a little, sure, startled by the vertigo, but this was different. Deeper, lower, ragged and wet, like a bellows filled with brine. It came from the tree line behind me, behind and to the left, in that slanted place where branches wove too tightly for light to pass, and roots jutted up like grasping fingers. I turned slowly, careful not to make noise, careful not to slip. Every instinct I had told me to run, but fear had taken my limbs and frozen them in place. An invisible net of silence stretched tight around my chest. The mist pulsed once, almost in sync with the breath. Then again, whatever it was watching. I could feel its eyes, like splinters under the skin. I hadn't come here looking for this. I had come hoping for redemption. After what happened at the Institute, after the incident, I needed something unassailable, something pure, something that couldn't be erased by politics or shame. The rumors about Duskwater had been a joke, a last resort, and yet, as I stood there, locked between the presence in the trees and the cold monument at my feet, I realized I hadn't come to find anything. I'd been brought. I had the terrible thought that the forest had been waiting, and now it was closing the door behind me. I turned back toward the trail, if it could still be called that, but it was gone. Where there had been a narrow path just moments before, there was now only dense growth, impenetrable thickets, and the low whisper of branches brushing against one another without wind. The forest had shifted, rearranged itself, as though it didn't want me to leave, as though I had been drawn in not by accident, but by design. The ground beneath the monument began to hum, so softly at first I thought it was imagined, a phantom noise in my head, but it grew, thrumming through my boots, into the soles of my feet, up through my bones, a frequency too low to hear with ears, but not too low to feel. My vision blurred at the edges, and the mist began to rise higher, thickening into tendrils that wrapped around my thighs like smoke with weight. I took one step back, and the forest inhaled. It was unmistakable. The air was pulled inward in one massive, silent breath. Leaves rustled in a singular direction. The mist coiled tighter, The trees groaned, not with wind but with movement, and somewhere far behind me, branches snapped in a rhythm, slow and measured, footsteps. I thought at first, but no. Footsteps do not creep, not like that. I pressed my palm to the monument, thinking maybe it would ground me, anchor me to something solid, something real. But the stone was warm, too warm, and beneath my skin, I felt it beat once, like a heart long buried. I stumbled away. The mist parted only slightly, and in its gap I saw something moving between the trees. A low shape, long and lashing, glinting with thorns. The shadow vine. The name came unbidden. I hadn't said it aloud, hadn't even known it until that moment. And yet it was there in my head, fully formed. The shadow vine horror. It didn't chase. It didn't rush. It simply crept forward, slowly, confidently, vines sliding across the forest floor, with a hiss, like dry leaves rubbed together in secret. Thorns shimmered faintly, oozing something dark and viscous, and as it moved, the forest behind it sagged, trees wilting like they were bending in reverence or fear. I backed away, breath shallow, eyes wide, each step harder than the last. As the falling sensation intensified, I wasn't walking on flat ground anymore. I was descending into what? I didn't know. Into where? I didn't want to imagine, but I couldn't look away, because deep within the shifting wall of vines, behind the thorns and the tendrils, something was beginning to rise, something with eyes, and they were already open. The eyes didn't blink. That was the first thing I noticed. Their sheer stillness, their hunger made static, like twin coals suspended in the dark, wide apart and low to the ground. They weren't like human eyes. They shimmered faintly within the coils of thorned vine, lidless and gleaming, as if wet with oil or blood, watching me not as an intruder, but as a curiosity, something to be studied, something already half consumed. I didn't move. I couldn't. The weight of those eyes held me like wire. Every instinct screamed to run, to turn and crash blindly through whatever lay behind me. But deeper than instinct, buried beneath the skin, was a colder knowledge that if I ran, I wouldn't get far. Not here. Not now. Not with the forest folding in around me like a lung-drawing breath. The mist clung to my calves like chilled fingers, swirling in complex patterns. I could almost understand, if I stared too long, symbols, shapes, letters, from a dead alphabet. They drifted through the fog like fading thoughts, and each time one touched my skin, I felt the breath of something ancient brush. The back of my mind. It wasn't a voice, it was an intention, old and sour and inescapable. I tried to speak. My lips parted. No sound came. The monument behind me thrummed again, a dull pulse, like a war drum buried beneath the earth. I felt it through my heels. It summoned, and something in the trees answered. The vines began to stir, slowly rising, not climbing toward me, not lunging, just unfolding. Their movement was unnatural, too fluid, like underwater plants swaying to a current only they could feel. Thorns the size of knife points gleamed dully in the half-light. One vine brushed a tree, and the bark split open, weeping sap that smelled unmistakably like meat left too long in the sun. My breath quickened, fogging in the air. Though the temperature hadn't dropped, I turned my head slightly, breaking eye contact with the creature, if that's what it was, and the spell weakened just enough for me to stagger backward, boots slipping in the wet mulch. I didn't dare take my eyes fully off it. Not yet, not until I understood what it was waiting for. Then I heard the whisper. It didn't come from the vines. It came from the trees themselves. A low, papery rasp, like parchment brushed by brittle fingers, a chorus of dry voices, layered and cracked with age, chanting something soft and circular, no distinct words, just rhythm, like lullabies sung backward. Underwater, behind me, the monument cracked. Not loudly, not in a way that screamed attention. It simply shifted, stone grinding against stone, and a thin fracture opened along its center, as though the thing had always been meant to split. From within, a faint blue light flickered once, then died. But in that brief moment, I saw something move inside it, a shape. Thin, pale, pressed against the inner walls, like a fetus carved from ice. I stepped away quickly, but the ground beneath me pitched suddenly, as if something massive had stirred beneath the soil. I dropped to one knee, hands plunging into the dirt, and immediately regretted it. The earth was breathing, not metaphorically. The dirt moved, ever so slightly, in and out, a slow rhythmic swell like lungs beneath the skin of the world. And when I looked down at my palms, they were covered in something that wasn't mud, black, glistening, with a sour stench like rotting flowers and vinegar. A sound split the air then, high-pitched and animal, but wrong in ways that defied comparison, like a fox scream but twisted, layered with the rumble of something large scraping against stone. It came from behind the vine thing, and in response, the eyes vanished, not blinked, vanished, as though they had never been. I pushed myself to my feet, stumbling back toward where the trail should have been. My legs felt loose, foreign, as though the bones inside them didn't agree on how to move. The sensation of falling had returned, not just when walking, but constantly now, like the earth beneath me was tilted and spinning, and I was the only one who noticed. "John," something said. My name, spoken softly by a woman's voice. I did not recognize. The syllables folded out of the mist, like breath against glass. It was gentle, familiar, wrong. I turned. Nothing but trees. And then beyond them, the briefest glimpse of movement, a pale face between two trunks, watching me with empty eyes, half submerged in shadow. Her mouth didn't move, but the voice came again. "John, you shouldn't have come back." Back. I had never been here before. Nah. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my face. Thorns tore at my jacket. Roots seemed to rise and twist beneath my feet. But I didn't stop. I didn't care where I was going. Only away from that thing in the clearing. Away from the eyes, the monument, the whispering trees. My breath came in ragged bursts, each step an effort, my balance threatening to give out with every stride. That falling sensation was stronger now, disorienting, like gravity was no longer aligned with the ground. At last, I stumbled into another clearing, wide and empty, with no stone, no mist, no vines, only dead trees standing like charred bones against the rising moonlight. I collapsed to my knees, gasping. Above me, high in the trees, something creaked, wood on wood. A groaning hinge, my eyes snapped upward, and there, suspended between two dead branches, hung a length of old rope, frayed, coiled, still swaying. Below it, the ground was darker than the rest. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, because in the silence that followed, I heard the whisper return, closer now, and this time, it wasn't calling my name. It was saying it. The rope still swayed, not from wind. There was none. The air was stagnant, heavy, as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting to exhale, until I made the next move. Yet the noose above me twisted gently, clockwise, creaking on some unseen hook in the branches, and though I told myself not to look too closely, my eyes betrayed me. I saw the fraying fibers worn thin at the neck, the faint groove in the wood where weight had pulled once, long and hard, and beneath it, still dark in the soil, the old stain had spread. It wasn't sap, not a paban mine. Arose slowly, every joint aching like I'd aged. Years in the last few minutes. My back throbbed with the echo of tension, the kind that comes after terror has burned itself into the muscles. The whispering had faded again, leaving only the strange silence of the forest. A silence not empty but full, the way a sealed room holds the smell of rot after too much time has passed. There were no birds here, no insects, not even the soft shuffle of leaves, just me, the rope, and the soft ambient hum of something below the surface. I scanned the clearing, hoping, somehow, to find direction. A new trail, even a suggestion of one. But the trees surrounding me were wrong. They were too close together, too symmetrical. Their branches knotted in strange curling patterns like runes carved by time and disease. Some had faces, at least shapes that resembled faces, grotesque contortions in the bark, mouths stretched wide in wordless screams, eyes bulging with sap, frozen mid-howl. I couldn't tell if they'd always been there, or if I was starting to see things I shouldn't. I turned from them. To my right, a path seemed to form, not in any deliberate way, but in the subtle parting of trees, the brief thinning of mist, a corridor of suggestion rather than substance, but it was something, anything. I took a step, and that's when I heard the bell, a single chime, distant and hollow, like a church bell rung underwater. It resonated low in my chest, rattling something loose behind my sternum. My teeth ached with it. My knees buckled slightly, There was no church on Cumberland. I knew this, and yet the bell tolled again, closer now, deeper. I turned toward it. The mist ahead began to thicken, rolling low across the ground like breath from an open mouth. It swallowed the path I thought I'd seen, but something within me pulled toward the sound, not curiosity, not fear, recognition. I took another step, then another. The trees began to change again, taller now, leaner, their trunks smoother, more uniform, and bleached pale by time, or something more unnatural. Moss clung to them like skin sloughing from bone. They grew in unnatural angles, crisscrossing above me, forming arches and ribs, a cathedral grown from rot and reverence. The bell rang again, louder this time, and then, beneath the sound, I heard a voice, not a whisper, a cry. It came from deep in the forest's belly, ragged, human, a plea scraped raw. I froze, breath locked in my throat. It came again, closer, a scream but strangled, half swallowed by the trees. It wasn't a call for help. It was the sound a person makes when they realize no help is coming, against all better judgment. I moved toward it. The path narrowed, funneled me deeper between branches that leaned down too low, forcing me to duck beneath them. Leaves brushed my shoulders, wet and cold like hands trailing down my back. Somewhere to my left, I heard a crunch, something heavy, stepping on bone. A breath followed. Close. I turned sharply. Nothing. Just the trees, stoic and silent. But then the mist parted, just for a moment, and I saw a figure stood between the trunks, human-shaped, barefoot, tall and thin, body wrapped in something like burlap or skin, impossible to tell in the dim. Its face was turned away. It didn't move, didn't breathe, until I stepped. Its head snapped toward me. Not slowly, not with hesitation, but with a jarring staccato motion, like a puppet's head pulled by broken strings. Its face was obscured, but the shape of its mouth was unmistakable. Open wide, not in surprise, not in rage, but in ecstasy. I stumbled back. Branches snagged at my coat. The mist surged again, and in a blink, the figure was gone. Another bell, this time louder. Closer. Above. I looked up. There, hanging in the air where no bough could hold it, was the bell, old and iron and rusted through, suspended by nothing. It turned slowly, silently, until it faced me, and then, without clapper or wind, it rang. The sound hit me like a wave, hot and sharp, splitting behind my eyes. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The scream caught in my throat. Images flooded my vision, memories that weren't mine, faces I didn't know. A child laughing in a field of dead leaves, a man hanging upside down from a tree, humming a lullaby, a woman kneeling in a circle of stones, her mouth sewn shut. Then darkness. I came to lying flat in the mud, the bell gone, the forest quiet again, but something had changed. The trees no longer stood still. They watched, not with eyes, but with presence. I felt them press against the edges of my thoughts, like fingers testing soft clay. They knew I was here. They remembered me. And somewhere in the mist, the voice came again. Not calling, repeating, John, John. Only this time, I wasn't sure it was just one voice. They were all saying it, and they were getting closer. They were all saying it. My name folded into the mist, like layers of breath passed down through dead mouths, spoken not in unison, but in succession, an overlapping chain of voices, tangled like roots beneath the forest floor. Men, women, children. Some were soft and pleading. Some sounded amused. One, just behind my right ear, was filled with such loathing, it left a cold line down my spine. I moved, not ran. Not yet, but each step forward felt like testing the edge of a frozen lake. The way the surface creaks, whispers, threatens to take you under. The air had thickened around me, tighter than before, like walking into a house that hadn't been opened in years. Wet plaster, old dust, and something deeper, earth that had seen blood. Above, the canopy folded closer. The sky had bled out entirely. There was no moon, no stars, only a faint violet stain in the high mist, where light once tried to live. My legs carried me forward, not from resolve, but from the brittle kind of survival impulse that rattles loose after too much fear has burned away. Control. The trees no longer stood separate, their limbs intertwined, braided overhead like skeletal arms drawn together in prayer or mourning. The trail, if it was a trail, twisted sharply and dipped, leading me to what looked like a hollow in the earth, a natural bowl overgrown with moss and bramble. I paused at the edge. The voices paused with me. Below in the depression lay a cabin, not the kind meant for shelter. Not the kind you'd ever find on a map. Its roof had long since collapsed, but the walls still stood, half buried in vine, windows blind with grime. The door was ajar, hanging off its hinges like a mouth too weary to stay shut. A wind, foul, moist, carrying the scent of open graves, pushed from within. It was the first structure I'd seen in hours, maybe longer. My sense of time had dissolved somewhere between the bell and the scream. I descended. Every step down the slope felt heavier than the last. The forest resisted. The mud thickened, branches whipped lightly at my arms, as if trying to turn me around. But I reached the cabin. My fingers brushed the doorway. It was ice cold. The grain of the wood pulsed faintly beneath my touch. I stepped inside. Darkness swallowed me whole, not the absence of light, but the presence of something deeper. It smelled of mildew and copper, with an undercurrent of rot so old it had stopped trying to hide. My eyes adjusted slowly. The interior was wrong, larger than it should have been. The far wall stretched away at a sharp angle. The ceiling sloped with unnatural geometry, like the cabin had been built to confuse orientation or hide something that didn't belong in linear space. A table sat at the center. Just a table, and a single chair. On the table, laid out with sickening precision, were photographs. They weren't old. They were recent, crisp, unfaded. Each one captured a figure standing alone in the woods. Some smiled. Some cried. Some were mid-turn, as if caught unaware. Their eyes were scratched out. Every one, deep gouges right through the paper. Then I found the last photo. Me, standing in the clearing near the monument, staring directly at the lens. My eyes intact, my mouth open. I hadn't smiled like that. I wouldn't, but there it was. As I stared, the photo began to curl at the edges, the image distorting, first warping, then liquefying, as if the ink itself were bleeding. My face melted into shadow, and then came the creak from the farthest corner of the cabin, where the light didn't reach. The sound of wood shifting under weight. I froze. Another creak, closer now, paired with a sound like thorns dragging across burlap. My fingers dug into the edge of the table. Then a breath, ragged, wet. I turned. The corner was still dark, but something moved within it. Something tall, plant-like, shuddering with life. I saw a glimmer of thorn, a flicker of eye, the shadow vine horror. It hadn't lunged, it hadn't hissed or growled, it just watched, and from the darkness behind it, other shapes began to rise, pale limbs unfolding from beneath rotted floorboards, eyes blooming like fungus across the walls. A low, droning sound filled the cabin, like wind through hollow bone. Then the floor pitched. I staggered back. The sense of falling returned, stronger now, like the gravity in the room had shifted inward, drawing everything toward the heart of the cabin. My stomach flipped. I dropped to my knees. The table cracked in two. Its photos sucked toward the center of the room, like leaves in a drain. The shadow vine thing took a step forward. Vines lashed outward, grazing the air like fingers hunting for shape. My legs screamed to move, but the cabin refused to let go, and in the walls, in the flickering places where shadow and rot met, faces formed, not carved, not imagined, faces made of wood and moss and meat, watching, whispering, always whispering. One face leaned forward, its mouth opened wide, and from within came a voice I knew, down to my bones. You were the one who left the gate open, John. You let her out. I ran, not because I had strength left, not because I had a plan, but because my body remembered something my mind was trying too hard to forget. That when a place begins to speak with the voices of the dead, and a creature that should not be real steps into the shape of your nightmares, you do not stay to ask questions. The cabin groaned behind me, a deep, wet shudder, like something exhaling its last breath, or its first. I stumbled up the slope, clawing at roots slick with dew and filth. The ground no longer stable but shifting, pulsing like something alive just beneath the skin of the earth. Each step felt like sinking, every patch of soil a trap waiting to close around my ankles. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. The thing in the cabin hadn't moved fast. It didn't need to. It knew the woods better than I ever could. My name still echoed in the mist, but it had changed tone. No longer whispering, no longer mocking. Now it was ritual, a chant, a beckoning. John, John, John. The syllables staggered around me, bouncing from tree to tree in a pattern I couldn't track. And I began to feel as though I was moving in circles. Every path looked familiar. Every tree bore the same fungal blooms and sickened bark. My pulse hammered against my ribs. My ears rang with something more than panic. An infrasound hum so deep, I felt it in my bones. And then, mercifully, a change. The trees ahead parted. Not much, but enough to reveal a clearing, bathed in a strange, amber glow. Not sunlight, not fire, something in between, like light remembered by the land, but warped through memory and rot. I broke into the open, lungs burning, and collapsed just past the threshold, expecting another trap, another illusion. But the trees didn't follow me. They stopped. I looked back, and for the first time saw them as they were. Not just trees, not just part of the forest, but shapes with purpose. Their trunks bent inward slightly, subtly, like a circle closing around something, around me. But the clearing resisted them, like whatever grew here refused to let them pass. I stood, legs shaking, and turned my gaze to the center. It was a garden, or what had once been one. Stones arranged in crude symmetry around a dry fountain, now overtaken by wild growth. The vines were thick here too, but different, less hostile, more orderly. They spiraled around posts and columns, as if obeying some invisible hand. Flowers bloomed in unnatural shapes, petals curled inward instead of out, their centers impossibly dark. Some of them watched. At the heart of the clearing, the monument rose. I had seen it in my research, back when I still believed in science over superstition, back before Cumberland devoured the rest of the expedition. But nothing had prepared me for seeing it with my own eyes. 10 feet tall, made from stone too smooth to be natural, its surface etched with symbols that hurt to look at, like looking into an open wound on the world. They shifted when you weren't watching. I blinked, and one symbol rearranged itself. Another vanished entirely. The mist didn't touch it. Wind didn't pass near it. It stood untouched in a place that breathed rot and memory. And around it, the mist swirled. Not random, not weather. It moved with intention, dancing in spirals around the monument's base, like steam rising from a buried wound. I approached, not by choice, but by inevitability, my feet moving forward, like they remembered something my mind had yet to uncover. The feeling of falling came again, not forward, not down, inward, as though my body was standing still, but my spirit had begun to slip, drawn into the gravity of that impossible stone. I could feel my balance shift, my stomach churn, my heartbeat slowed, my limbs tingled, distant and numb. I reached out, not to touch it, but to steady myself. My fingers passed through the mist, and everything changed. I was no longer in the clearing, not entirely. The world folded, the trees remained, but they were watching, leaning inward with ancient hunger. The monument stood still, but its surface now glowed faintly, etched with crimson veins that pulsed with a rhythm I dared not name. And I was not alone. A woman stood opposite me, her body wrapped in what looked like ceremonial garb, woven from vine and bark. Her eyes sewn shut with thin gold thread. Her mouth did not move, but I heard her just the same inside my skull. Her words blooming like mold. You opened the door, John, and now it cannot be shut. I tried to speak, to demand answers, to ask her what door, what witch, what price. But my throat burned shut. My breath stuck like thorns. She stepped forward. The ground didn't respond. The mist recoiled from her. Behind her, the monument shifted, not physically, but perceptually. It expanded, its presence deepened, pressing outward like something alive, pushing against membrane, something imprisoned, something remembered. Then the woman's hand rose, and with a single gesture, she pointed toward the sky. I looked up, above the clearing, where no light should reach. The mist had begun to swirl in a wide, slow spiral, as if the forest itself were exhaling. Shapes formed there, impossible things, shifting forms of root and bone and thought, stitched into the clouds like wounds healing backward. And from the spiral descended a sound, not the bell. This was a heartbeat, deep, monolithic. The rhythm of something buried, something forgotten and furious, something waking beneath the forest. My knees buckled. I fell forward, catching myself in the moss. The woman vanished, not in a blink, but like smoke losing its shape. The heartbeat grew louder. The mist deepened, and then I heard the voice again. Not from the trees, not from within, but from beneath the earth itself. She remembers you, John. She remembers the bargain and the blood you owe. The vine stirred. The monument cracked, and the ground beneath my hands began to bleed. The earth trembled, not violently, not with the brute force of quakes, but subtly, like something large breathing, just beneath the skin of the world. The ground pulsed with that same subterranean heartbeat, steady and slow, each thrum reverberating up my arms where they touched the moss, through my ribs, into my teeth. I tried to rise, but my legs were leaden, my balance scattered like ashes in wind. The mist had thickened into a wall around the clearing, no longer vapor but almost flesh, undulating slightly, veined with threads of shadow. The monument no longer cracked. It split. A fracture ran from its crown to its base, wide as a man's palm, and something black gleamed within, fluid or maybe a kind of ink, suspended in a way that made my head ache. The scent of iron was thick in the air now, not fresh blood, but something older, sour, like the fluid in preserved specimens left too long in forgotten jars. I crawled backward on elbows, away from the bleeding ground, away from the humming obelisk, but there was no exit, no edge. The trees had folded out of sight entirely. The garden had vanished. I was alone in a circle of moss and stone and dark. And then I wasn't. A sound like tearing silk. Behind me, a new shape rose from the soil. Not a creature, not yet. A mass, a knot of vines wound too tightly to be natural. Twisting around bone, growing out of something unseen. Thorns protruded in every direction, slick and dark, and with it came a cold so deep. My breath crystallized before my eyes. It moved as if pulled upward by invisible threads, unraveling itself until a vague humanoid form began to take shape. Too tall, too thin, head low, arms too long, vine-wrapped hands dragging the ground. It had no eyes, no mouth, only a smooth expanse of bark-like hide where a face should be. But it turned to me just the same. The shadow vine horror. It had followed me. Or perhaps it had never left. Perhaps it had only waited for the clearing, for the monument to split, for the gate to remember what I had done. It stepped forward without sound. The moss recoiled from its feet. The mist bent inward, folding protectively around it. I couldn't move. My fingers clawed into the soil, but found no purchase, only softness, like freshly turned grave earth. I whispered a plea. Not to God, not to anyone I could name, but to the forest itself, to the unseen thing watching from above and below. Let me go. Let me wake. Let me forget. But the forest has no mercy, and it never forgets. The monument began to pulse, red light bleeding from the fracture in rhythm with the heartbeat below. The light cast long, impossible shadows, each one a distorted figure, some child-sized, others monstrous, all writhing along the ground like serpents, seeking warmth. The shadow vine horror paused, not from fear, from reverence. It turned toward the monument, and it knelt. My breath caught in my throat. From the fracture, something pushed, not fully visible, only hinted. A mass of writhing roots, slick with fluid, bound together in what might have been the hint of a face, or a mask, or a skull. It didn't emerge. Not fully, but it saw me, and I remembered. The ritual, the circle of 12. My colleagues, hands joined around this very stone, the air thick with burning sage and ozone. We had called something not out of ignorance, but desperation, a breakthrough, a gamble, a plea to forces older than memory. I had led it. I had asked it for knowledge, and it had given it to me at a price I never stayed to pay. The ground surged beneath me. The soil turned to liquid, dragging me an inch deeper. I struggled, but it was like swimming in syrup. The monument's light seared brighter. The mist pressed tighter. The horror stood once more, and the vines along its arms writhed like snakes. In anticipation, the voice returned, not from the forest. You ran, John. But bargains are roots. They grow, even in silence, even in denial. My skin prickled with movement. Tiny thorns, no longer visible, crawled beneath the surface of my arms, blooming in patterns up my veins. I screamed. I tore at my sleeves. My skin peeled like paper. Beneath, something green and black had begun to grow. Something broke inside me. Then, not bone, not thought, but the last thread of disbelief, the one in the veil of vines, the woman from the clearing. She had been human once, a scientist, a visionary, cast out, left for dead among these woods. She found something older here, made a pact of her own, became the Witch of Duskwater. The first bargain, and I had opened the door. The vines beneath the monument surged upward in a violent pulse, striking the sky with a sound like cracking ice. The mist split. The spiral above widened, and from it, descending slowly, impossibly, came her silhouette, draped in shadow, trailing blackened flora, her eyes blooming with petals made of bone. She hovered above the stone. The shadow vine horror bowed. The mist held its breath, and I, body failing, vision tunneling, felt the last of the soil consume my knees. The witch had returned, and the forest would make sure I stayed to greet her. The witch did not descend so much as unfurl from the spiral above, her body trailing behind her like smoke caught in windless air. One moment a silhouette stitched from shadow and mist, the next a fully formed figure haloed in thornlight, her presence pressed against the clearing like humidity before a summer storm. Heavy and impossible to breathe through, I sank lower into the soil, no longer by force but by instinct, by the sheer gravitational will of something that knew it had been worshipped once, and would be again. She floated to the monument without sound, her feet never touching ground, trailing vines that writhed behind her like obedient serpents. Her head turned slowly, too slowly toward me, each movement deliberate, like the ticking of an ancient clock. Her eyes were twin blossoms of bone petals and rot, wide and wet, with a hunger that no human word could name. I felt them pressing into me, pulling at memory and marrow alike. The shadow vine horror knelt fully now, head bowed so low, its thorns bit deep into the earth. Around us, the mist began to hum, not a sound of air or breath, but music, low, discordant notes, some buried so deep they bypassed the ear entirely and shivered through the nervous system instead. It sounded like mourning, but not for the dead, for the living, for those who had once dreamed of escape. The witch raised her arms. The mist swelled in kind, and something answered, not from above. From below, the soil buckled, a tremor rippled through the clearing, the monument pulsed, and suddenly the ground split open in a ring around me. A perfect circle of wet, root-bound tunnel that yawned into the earth like a mouth opening for communion. From its depths rose voices, screaming, whispering, laughing, all at once. All familiar. I heard Nathan first, then Dr. Lyle, then Harper. Names from the expedition, faces I hadn't seen since the night we called the forest, and it answered, they were alive. Or had been, or were still. Not in body, not in spirit, but in roots. You left us. Harper said. You fed her, Nathan added. Not accusingly, but reverently. She remembers your gift. I began to sob, the sound dry and shaking, useless. My hands clawed at the mossy rim of the pit. But thorns had begun to sprout there, biting into my palms. Blood trickled down into the hole. The roots below quivered. The voices sighed with ecstasy. The witch lowered her arms. The mist fell still. And then she spoke. Her mouth never opened. Her lips were stitched with golden thread, but her voice bloomed directly inside me, bypassing all barriers, all sanity. You opened the gate. John, now you must walk through. The clearing changed. The monument turned, not literally, but in concept, as if the world reoriented itself around it. The stone was no longer a marker. It was a door, a threshold. The symbols etched into its surface shone now, each one a scar in the air, and together they began to vibrate. Space around it shimmered, bending and flexing like heat over asphalt, and from within that crack, something smiled. I could see it now. Not its face, not entirely, but a shape, a being made not of body, but of purpose. The God we called, the God we forgot, the God that waited. The shadow vine horror stood, and I saw that its vines had grown longer. Now, stretching from the edges of the clearing toward the opening in the earth, it gestured toward me, one elongated finger, pointing not to the monument, but to the hole. To return, the witch said. You must descend. Return where? I wanted to scream, but I already knew. To the ritual, to the moment, to the cost. I tried to step back. My body no longer obeyed. The vines beneath the moss reached up and gripped my ankles, tender as a lover's touch, firm as a noose. They began to pull. I fought. I screamed. My fingers found rock, but it crumbled. My breath came in ragged gasps. The heartbeat rose again. Faster now, urgent. The hole widened. I slid down into the earth. Darkness swallowed me whole. The mist above was sealed off. The clearing vanished. And I fell, not through space, but through time. Memories flashed around me, like lightning behind closed eyes. The expedition, the old maps, the ritual, the glyphs no one could translate, the warnings in the journals we ignored, the look Harper gave me before we joined hands in the circle, her fear, her trust. The forest had not lied. We had made a bargain, and I had run before it could claim its due. But now it pulled me back, not as punishment, as sacrament. The tunnel ended, not in dirt, not in stone, but in a hollow place, deep beneath the woods, where light moved without source and roots hung from the ceiling like chandeliers made of veins. The air buzzed with the sound of flies, though I saw none. Pools of dark water rippled without disturbance, and in the center of the chamber stood another monument, smaller, cruder, older, built of bone and vine, and at its base lay 12 bodies, half consumed, half alive. I recognized them all. The expedition, still breathing, still waiting. As I approached, their eyes opened and they began to sing. Their song was not made of words, at least not any human ones. It was sound stripped of meaning, rebuilt from breath and bone and the rustling of leaves in windless air, a chorus born of grief and worship, each voice layering over the next until it created something vast and cold, the sound a living presence that filled the cavern with a pressure like rising water. My ears bled, but I could not look away. Harper lay closest, her eyes milky but unblinking, her chest barely rising, ribs visible beneath skin that had begun to take on the mottled, fibrous texture of bark. Her mouth moved with the others, though I doubted breath passed her lips anymore. When her gaze met mine, there was no accusation, only understanding, only surrender. She had accepted it. They all had the gift, the curse, the price. Around the bone monument, vines coiled like veins around a heart. They pulsed in time with that subterranean heartbeat, every throb echoing through the floor and into my chest. I stumbled forward, hands raised, not in defense, but in something closer to reverence, not because I wanted to, but because I remembered. This is where we began. This is where we ended. I dropped to my knees as the singing stopped. Not abruptly, but as a flame gutters out, gradually, with a sigh. The silence that followed was worse, more intimate, expectant. The chamber waited, and then, from the dark beyond the monument, came a shape. She was no longer draped in mist and majesty. The witch walked now barefoot, her feet bare of flesh, toes of root and thorn. Her body was not entirely solid, flickering between woman and growth, between face and mask. She moved slowly, each step leaving trails of black moss in her wake. I could not move. She stood before me, and the roots behind her twisted into a frame, an arch, a gate, a wound in the world itself. Beyond it, I saw trees, impossibly tall, their bark slick with rot and sap, their branches twitching like antennae. A forest, not of earth, but of thought, of memory, of regret. The gate, to the other side of the pact. You remember now, she said, not with her stitched mouth, but with her presence, her aura curling into my skull like smoke. I do, I whispered. You opened the way. You must close it. She raised a hand, fingers long and bark covered, and pointed toward the monument of bone. At its base, something moved, a form, buried beneath the others. Smaller, less consumed. A child, no older than 10, her eyes wide, her mouth slack in sleep or death. I couldn't tell. Her body was wrapped in vine like a cocoon, only her face visible. My breath caught. My daughter, the witch said. Left here. Buried by time. Forgotten by man. She was... I searched my memory, but the truth slipped like water through fingers. There was no child on the expedition. She was the price before you, the witch said. Stepping closer, the first key. Your minds erased her. The forest took the memory. But the pact remembers. The roots remember. I dropped my head. The realization slid into me like a cold knife. We hadn't summoned the forest for answers. Not entirely. We had summoned it for return. For reversal. For resurrection. Someone had made a request beyond knowledge. Someone had asked to bring the girl back, and the cost had spiraled outward. She must go back, the witch said. Her breath keeps the gate open. I shook my head. You want me to kill her? No, the witch said. You must take her place. The chamber pulsed with agreement. The roots around the girl shuddered and began to recede, revealing her arms, her legs, thin and pale but whole. The air around her shimmered like heat above a fire. She stirred, lips parting, a single exhale escaping, like the first breath after drowning. She lives only because the pact remains unpaid, the witch said. Balance. One in, one out. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to run. The chamber had shifted. No exit remained. Only the gate behind the witch, and the monument pulsing with breath and memory. You were the key, she said. Your hand completed the circle. Your voice called the name. Your fear sealed it. I didn't know, I rasped. You did. I sank to the floor. My body trembled. My fingers had begun to bleed sap. She walked to the child, knelt beside her, and lifted her head gently. The girl's eyes opened. Blue, endless, wrong. She looked at me and smiled. Not a child's smile, a knowing one. The witch stood again. Her presence towered, no longer bound by shape. Her hair grew into the ceiling. Her feet fused with the roots. You may go, she said. Or you may stay. The girl sat up. The gate pulsed. The choice was mine, and no matter which I chose, the forest would remember. I stood before the child and the gate. The forest's silence more suffocating than any scream. The witch had not moved, yet her gaze, rooted in every surface, etched in every heartbeat of the chamber, held me locked in a moment that refused to pass. The roots pulsed softly beneath my feet, like a breath drawn in and held, waiting. The girl sat up slowly. Her arms trembled from disuse, and yet she moved like she belonged here, as if the soil remembered her weight, as if the stone had cradled her before. Her face, though young, carried an expression far older than her body should allow, calm, certain, and utterly unafraid. Is it you? I asked. She tilted her head, her voice a wind that stirred no air. You left me. The roots around my ankles constricted slightly. A reminder, not forceful yet, but impatient. Above, the vines that formed the witch's crown twitched in agitation. The monument behind me, still alive with faint glow, whispered in a language that pressed into my skull like water through cracked glass. The choice was mine, but it had always been. We'd pretended it was shared. A democratic invocation, a group experiment in forbidden ritual. But deep down, we all knew who the forest had watched, whose voice the roots had bent toward, whose guilt sang loudest beneath the soil. 9. The witch extended a hand. Her fingers now bore the shape of mine, long and familiar, with a pale scar at the knuckle where I'd once broken it in the field, during a long-forgotten experiment gone wrong. She wasn't just the spirit of the woods. She was the mirror of sacrifice, of memory. I stepped closer to the girl. She smelled of old stone, of dew, and of something sweetly rotting. The scent of fruit left too long in the sun. Her eyes remained locked on mine, and in their depths I saw flickers of things that could not be myself. Young and laughing, Harper's face as we drank from the ritual bowl, the child running through sunlit trees, hands full of moss and feathers. You asked them to bring me back, she said. I nodded, though the truth fell like ash in my mouth. I didn't know the price. You did, she whispered. The gate behind her began to hum. Light, colorless and cold, poured from the wound in the world, casting everything into stark relief. The roots glittered with moisture. The bodies of the expedition shimmered faintly, breath rattling in their ruined throats. Harper raised a hand, and for a moment I thought she was reaching for me. But no, she pointed toward the gate. You go, she said. The forest stirred. The witch stepped back, and the child stood. The monument's hum became a pulse. Faster now, the rhythm of decision. My limbs ached with the weight of the forest's attention. My thoughts were no longer my own, fragmented, scattered through the roots, tangled in memories I hadn't lived. But the feeling was clear. If I walked through the gate, I would take her place. I would become the breath that held the wound closed, the sacrifice that sealed the bargain. I would join the roots, the songs, the soil, and she would be free, alive, human. But if I refused, if I ran, fought, begged, it would not be undone. The forest had been cheated once. It would not forgive again. Someone would bleed. Someone always did. My knees buckled. The chamber darkened as I collapsed to the floor. Though no light had changed, it was the weight of the moment, the choice coalescing. I saw my hands blur, flesh flickering with bark, fingers twitching with the first touch of root memory. I cried out. The child took my hand. Her grip was cool, dry, her skin rough like cedar. Thank you, she said. And I knew then it had never been about the expedition, not about knowledge or redemption. It had always been about this, about me, about one man who asked for too much, and a forest that never forgot the sound of his voice. The gate yawned wider. I stood, took one step, then another. The chamber wept around me, not with tears, but with relief. The roots loosened. The vines swayed. The monument dimmed. As I neared the gate, the world around it twisted, branches forming symbols, faces emerging from bark. I saw all of them. The old gods, the forgotten ones, watching, judging, waiting. I paused at the threshold, looked back. The girl blinked. She was more human now, cheeks flushed, chest rising with breath. The others, Harper, Lyle, Nathan, had fallen silent, their bodies still, peaceful, released. The witch bowed her head. The forest whispered, "Balance," and I stepped through, into the dark, between trees that had no roots, into a silence older than sound, into the place where the forest keeps its secrets and feeds them. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the world unraveled, twisting in on itself like a storm caught in glass. The forest was no longer wood and leaf, no longer earth and sky. It was an endless cathedral of shadow and thorn, walls pulsing with a breath not my own, ceilings dripping with darkness that clung to my skin like cold sweat. The feeling of falling returned, but this time it was no illusion. The ground dissolved beneath me, replaced by an abyss that yawned endlessly, swallowing sound and light alike. I tumbled through a void where time fractured, memories bleeding into one another, laughter turning to screams, dawn to dusk, hope to despair. Roots, thick as arms, snaked through the blackness, curling and tightening like a strangler's grip. They wrapped around my legs, pulling me downward toward a place where even the shadows dared not linger. A low growl vibrated through the air, a promise of pain and release entwined in one. Then, from the depths, the shadow vine horror emerged, an immense tangle of thorn and vine, eyes glowing with a cruel, sentient light. Its voice was the rustle of dead leaves, the crack of splintering wood, a sound that burrowed beneath my skin and settled into my bones. "You belong here," it whispered, a statement and a curse. I struggled, but the vines tightened, drawing me closer to the heart of the forest's dark soul. The thorns pierced flesh and spirit alike, and with each prick I felt pieces of myself, memories, dreams, fragments of hope, shatter and fall away. Yet within that torment, a strange clarity bloomed. The forest had taken everything from me, my past, my freedom, my future. But it had given me something in return, understanding. The pact was never about escape or revenge. It was about acceptance, the acceptance of what we fear most, the darkness within ourselves and the world. As the horror enveloped me completely, I no longer fought. I surrendered to the endless falling, the crushing weight of roots and shadows, and the whisper of the witch's voice carried on the mist outside the forgotten monument. "You are home now." And in that final, suffocating embrace, the forest took everything from me. The silence that followed was absolute. and the woods waited, patient and eternal, for the next voice to call out from Duskwater, Georgia. Story 2. The fire was still warm. It's the first thing I remember thinking, as my fingers hovered inches above the half-collapsed hearth, the skin on my hand prickling at the lingering heat, at the undeniable proof that something had been here not long ago. Maybe minutes, maybe seconds. The blackened logs still hissed softly, their embers glowing like the dying eyes of an animal curled in the belly of the cabin's stone mouth. Above them, the soot-streaked chimney let out a long, low groan, like an old man exhaling his final breath. Outside, the wind had died. The silence had teeth. The door hadn't been locked. That in itself should been enough to send me back down the hill, to the Jeep parked crooked on the trail. Its tires sunk slightly into the wet soil, where the forest had started to reclaim the path. But I had come too far, too deep. I had followed the coordinates, the letter, the map etched into the back of a weathered photograph, with a child's face scratched out in jagged charcoal strokes, the kind of thing you find in a box that should stayed buried, the kind of thing that pulls you forward when you already know better. The floor creaked beneath my boots, the sound sharp and lonely in the tight cabin. The boards were uneven, warped by years of cold and damp. But it was the smell that unsettled me most, not the usual rot of neglected wood, or even the mildew that clung to forgotten furniture like moss on stone, but something deeper, older. It drifted beneath the surface of the place, just below the warmth of the fire. A cold mist that slipped in around my ankles, curling like curious fingers around my legs, and with it came the stench, faint at first, like damp cloth left to fester in a sealed trunk. But then it thickened, clotted in the back of my throat, metallic and raw, like open earth mixed with spoiled meat. Like something dead had waited too long to be remembered. I didn't say anything. I didn't breathe. The mist pulsed. I could feel it, not see it move. No, not quite. But I felt it throb softly, with some unseen rhythm, as if the house itself was breathing beneath the floorboards. The air was too still, the kind of stillness that exists in the moment after a scream, or just before a storm breaks the sky. I looked over my shoulder once, just once, toward the crooked door hanging slightly ajar, its edge scraped raw, where something, maybe claws, had gouged out 3 long trenches down its center. Inside, the shadows didn't flicker, even with the fire behind me. They just hung there, thick, unmoving, absolute. The cabin was one room, cramped and uneven, with a slanted ceiling held up by rough-hewn beams, blackened with age. To the left, a table, 2 chairs, one overturned. Beside it, a child's boot, half buried beneath a pile of dried leaves that had no business being indoors. To the right, a cot, unmade. The blanket was tangled and soaked in something dark and sticky, crusted now like dried sap or old blood. On the wall above it, a set of wind chimes made from bird bones swayed gently, even though no breeze touched them. I took one step forward, and the fire hissed louder, The heat turned sharp, almost angry. A sudden gust from the chimney, stirring ashes across the floor in chaotic spirals. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something move in them. A shape? No, not a shape. A hand, long-fingered, not quite human. But when I blinked, it was gone. My breath steamed in the cold. Though my skin still prickled from the heat behind me, I knelt beside the fire, scanning the ashes, the stone, the gap where the logs had burned down to bone and charcoal. But there was nothing there now, only silence, only heat, only that strange smell, thickening, bleeding through the cabin, like a secret finally let loose. I stood slowly, careful not to let the floor groan beneath me. The mist hadn't retreated. If anything, it had grown bolder, higher, now licking at my knees, biting cold. It moved with intention, like it knew I was here. Something creaked overhead. My eyes snapped upward, tracing the splintered beams above. The roof was low, barely 8 feet from floor to ceiling, and coated in a layer of frost that hadn't melted, despite the fire's heat. From somewhere above the rafters, I heard it again, a slow, deliberate shift, wood on wood, weight settling or rising. There shouldn't have been a second floor. The blueprints hadn't shown one. And from the outside, the roof pitched steep and low, almost like a hunter's lean-to. Nothing more, but I heard it again, closer, like someone or something crawling through the hollow space between the beams, a dragging sound, nails maybe, or claws. I backed toward the door. The fire flared, throwing sparks against the stones behind me. The lantern on the wall flickered, once, twice, then steadied again, its light unnaturally still. The air had grown thick, syrupy. My legs felt heavy. The smell now was overwhelming, crawling up my throat like fingers pressing from the inside. I shouldn't have come here, but I had to. I had to know if it was true, if the stories were real, if what I'd done had truly awakened something in these woods, something bound in bark and bone, something ancient. Another sound. This time behind me, the overturned chair moved. Not fell, not tipped, moved. It dragged half an inch across the floor with a shivering screech, and I swear to God I saw the mist wrap around its legs, like vines pulling it inward. My hand went to the revolver at my hip. Reflex more than intent. But when I looked down, I realized the mist had already wrapped around my boots, slick and stinging, like ice water laced with glass. I tried to step back. The floor didn't let me. For a second, I thought I had just frozen. Panic, shock, call it what you will. But then I looked down and saw that the wood beneath me had blackened, the grain twisting into unfamiliar shapes beneath the mist, the knots warping like knuckles. My boots stuck fast, as if the floor itself had softened around them. Above me, the creaking stopped. A single drop of something, thick, clear, and reeking, fell from the beams and struck my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I couldn't. The fire hissed again, louder, now, angry. The shadows stirred, And in the center of the room, where the mist thickened most, the air folded inward, twisted like something unseen had stepped into the world and hadn't bothered to take a shape yet. I opened my mouth to speak, to call out, maybe even to scream. And that's when the lantern lit the path. A narrow beam shot from it, sudden and silent, pointing toward the rear of the cabin, where no door had ever been, where now, impossibly, one stood, tall, narrow, crooked and open, just enough to show the forest beyond. A forest that shouldn't have been there, a path that hadn't existed. But it was waiting, just like everything else. The door hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. When I'd circled the cabin from the outside, just minutes ago, it had only 3 walls and a single way in, yet here it stood, tall and narrow, its warped frame leaning inward like it had been built by hands that didn't understand symmetry. It pulsed faintly in the lantern light, as though it had a breath of its own, or worse, was waiting for mine. Beyond the threshold, the forest blinked into view. Not the one I had come through, not the trail that had taken me through. Fundies, dense thickets, and sleeping creeks. No, this was different. Older, wilder, a corridor of trees I didn't recognize, too close together and too tall, like they had grown in competition, their black trunks covered in slick bark that shimmered in the lantern's glow. There were no stars overhead, only branches, knotted and interlocked, as if trying to keep something in. I should've run. I know that now, but back then, when the door opened without a sound, and the mist began to drift through it like an invitation, I stepped forward because some part of me still clung to the hope that this was about answers, that this was science unraveling its mysteries at the edge of sanity, not a descent into something far older and far crueler. The moment I passed through, the temperature dropped like a guillotine. The air snapped shut behind me, thick and damp, a wall of cold that bit through my jacket and into my spine. The door was gone. Just gone. No latch, no hinges, no frame. The trees had closed behind me, swallowing the structure like a mouth sealing shut over a meal. The forest breathed differently here. It exhaled in short, wet gasps, fog rolling low over the ground, creeping like it was avoiding attention. The scent was stronger now, suffocatingly strong. The smell of things buried but not forgotten, of wet leaves rotting under snow, of fur matted with blood, of something long dead trying to crawl its way back to memory. I walked. There was no path. Not really. Just the faint line where the mist parted slightly with each step I took, as if deciding whether to allow me passage or trap me for good. The trees seemed to shift in the corners of my vision, their shapes wrong, subtly twisted, branches that curled like fingers and roots that pulsed beneath the mossy soil. I passed an old stump, cracked wide as if struck by lightning, but the inside was not hollow. Something had grown there, a gnarled mass of bark and bone, indistinguishable from one another, like veins winding through deadwood. like cartilage forged in cedar. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't obey. Far ahead, somewhere beyond the veil of fog, I heard a sound, a wet crack, then a dragging noise. Then silence. The noise returned, closer now. It wasn't animal. No four-legged thing moved like that. This was something upright, something heavy. Its gait was uneven, as if it dragged part of itself or someone. I crouched low, instinct guiding me more than thought. The mist coiled against my knees like a living thing, and I swore it shivered. I held my breath, listening. My heartbeat was a drum against my ribs, and my teeth ached with tension. Another sound, snapping twigs this time, followed by something wet slapping against bark, and then a whisper. Close. Too close. Nancy. Not shouted. Not spoken. Breathed, like someone had leaned in, just behind my ear. Lips not quite touching skin. I turned, heart clawing its way into my throat. But there was nothing, only trees, and the endless mist, and the memory of that voice. But it had said my name. No one should know my name here. I moved faster after that, though. I didn't know where I was going. Only away from whatever knew me, whatever had stolen the sound of my own name and fed it back to me like a promise. The forest darkened. Inexplicably, the lantern on my belt still burned, but its light reached shorter, with every step, shrinking inward like it was afraid. The trees here grew tighter, hungrier. Their trunks curled inward in slow spirals, bark writhing with the faint movement of beetles that looked too pale and too still. That's when I saw the sigil, etched into the side of an ancient birch. The symbol was crudely carved, lines forming a twisted spiral inside a broken circle, flanked by claw-like runes. It bled. Not sap, not resin, blood. Resh. The moment I saw it, something shifted in the forest. The mist recoiled. The silence deepened, and from somewhere ahead, the dragging sound returned. But it was faster now. Urgent. Hungry. I ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots clawed at my boots. I didn't care. My breath tore from my lungs in ragged bursts, every step echoing in that too still world. A stone circle stood in its center, 5 feet high, jagged and ancient, covered in the same runes, the same bleeding spiral. The air here was thick, syrupy, buzzing with pressure, like standing beside an old power station. Hum and throb, invisible but undeniable. And in the middle of it, lying on the frozen earth, was a single lantern. Not mine, not the one I'd followed. Its glass was cracked, its handle broken, but the flame inside still burned, leading into the trees. But not just any trees. These ones were wrong. Their bark flaked in large gray strips, revealing wood that pulsed beneath, red-veined and damp, and from their branches hung things, bones, feathers, teeth, trinkets of warning or invitation. My legs didn't want to move, but something else did. Something within the forest, just behind the first row of trees, barely visible in the flickering lantern light. Something stood, tall, still, watching. Its skin looked like bark, stretched over too many joints. Its fingers ended in claws made of bone, and its head was a mass of twisted wood and antlers, empty eye sockets, bleeding mist. I couldn't breathe to beckon, and the lantern at my feet flared. The path ahead lit up, just barely, just enough, and the bone-bark beast waited. I don't remember moving. One moment, I was staring into the dark sockets of a thing that should not exist. And the next, I was walking, one step at a time, into the forest it guarded. The broken lantern in my hand throwing just enough light to make every shadow seem deeper, more watchful. The forest did not speak, but it listened. I could feel it, heavy in my chest, like pressure before a thunderstorm. The trees grew closer together now, branches clawing overhead to block even the illusion of sky. My breath fogged the air in front of me, but I began to notice it never lingered, always pulled away, as though something unseen inhaled it the moment it escaped my lips. The bones hanging from the branches swayed. Though no wind touched them, they clicked together in faint rhythms, like teeth chattering, or a language meant only for the dead. I passed another sigil, carved into bark, this one fresh, wet, and glistening, the wood beneath still weeping. As I stepped by, a long crack echoed behind me. I turned, heart thudding, but it wasn't a branch. It was the tree itself, splitting open, a wound tearing slowly along the trunk. The sound was like tendons snapping. The gap did not bleed, but something inside pulsed once, like a breath held far too long finally exhaled. I ran again. I don't know why. There was no destination, no reason to believe forward was any safer than back. But I ran because something in my blood told me not to stop. Not now. Not here. A root caught my foot. I fell hard, the lantern tumbling from my grip and rolling to a stop several feet away. Its light sputtering but holding. My palms scraped against something slick and soft. When I lifted them, they were covered in black slime, thick and cold with the unmistakable stink of decay. I had fallen into a pit, not deep, but deliberate. The ground here had been disturbed, dug, and silled. I pushed up on shaking legs, brushing off clumps of soil and whatever else clung to me. Around the edge of the shallow pit, small wooden markers protruded from the earth, each one etched with the same spiral sigil, each bound with what looked like sinew and woven hair. It was a grave. No, it was many. A burial site, but nothing about it felt sacred. I backed away slowly, my feet squelching in the soft ground. Then I heard the laughter. It came from the trees, thin and high, like a child choking on joy. Not playful, not human. It rippled through the mist, bouncing off the trunks, multiplying into echoes that didn't match. voices that overlapped and layered until I couldn't tell how many were speaking, or if any of them were real. "She's here," one voice whispered. "She opened the door." Another sang. "She broke the promise." The trees shuddered. I grabbed the lantern and stumbled forward, desperate to put space between me and the voices. But the path had changed again. The forest had shifted, folding in on itself, the trees rearranging like ribs around a wound. I had no choice but to follow the direction the beast had shown me, even if every instinct begged me to turn back. The further I went, the colder it became. The mist thickened, turning to frost on the edges of leaves and bark, forming delicate lacework patterns that pulsed with faint inner light. The smell grew sharper, less wrought now, more like the metallic tang of old blood, the stale breath of crypts. And in the distance, I saw it. A light, not a flame, but something brighter, steadier, a structure. It rose between the trees like a tumor of stone, uneven, gray, and ancient. Not a cabin, not quite, more like a shrine, its face covered in vines that slithered as I approached, curling away from the sigils carved into its doorframe. The door was open. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped again. Sharp, immediate. I could see my breath, feel it, freeze on my lips. The air hummed with static. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings, charcoal and ash, smeared across the stone in frantic loops. Scenes of ritual, of sacrifice, of the forest itself bowing to something beneath the earth. At the center of the floor, there was a well, dry, crack, but the air around it pulsed with heat. I stepped closer, drawn against my will, and peered into the dark. It was not empty. Far below, I saw movement, a twisting mass of roots and limbs of flesh that shifted between bark and bone. A face emerged, or what resembled one, hollow-eyed, jaw unhinged, the bone bark beast, or something like it, not yet risen, not fully formed. It saw me, not with eyes, with recognition. The air rushed upward, a scream with no sound, and the stone beneath my feet cracked. I staggered back as a blast of cold air erupted from the well, extinguishing my lantern. Darkness swallowed everything, and in that pitch black, I heard a whisper, not from the forest, but from inside me. Break the curse, or feed the forest. The shrine trembled. The forest moaned, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. It had entered me. Part of it now lived beneath my skin, and the forest had begun to change, because I had changed. I woke on the forest floor, or maybe I hadn't slept. Maybe I had blacked out, lost time to whatever crawled out of that shrine and into me. The sky above was gone again, hidden behind the twisted canopy, and my body ached with the kind of exhaustion that lived in the marrow, a hollow hum beneath the skin that felt borrowed, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The shrine was gone, vanished, as if it had never been carved into stone or bled from the roots. In its place stood a twisted tree, gnarled and weeping sap, the color of ink. The ground around it was scorched, spiraled outward in blackened rings like the aftermath of a fire that never burned. I tried to move, but my limbs resisted, not paralyzed, just hesitant. They knew something I didn't. They remembered more than I could beneath my skin. I felt the forest whispering. It wasn't words. Not yet. But impressions. Hunger. Memory. Punishment. I staggered forward, limbs heavy, as though the air had thickened around me. Every breath was labor. The mist now clinging to my face, like cobwebs soaked in ice water. Somewhere distant, a crow cawed. 3 times, slow and deliberate, and the trees shivered in response. There was a trail, this time, not marked by footprints, but by lanterns, dozens of them, hanging from branches on thin ropes made of woven hair and bark fibers. Each flickered with a pale blue light, the kind that didn't warm but repelled the dark just enough to create silhouettes between the gaps. Figures. Watching, they didn't move. Not yet, but their outlines blurred the longer I stared, like they were made from smoke and memory. They bore no faces, no names, just presence. And as I passed, I felt something pulled from me, memories, maybe fleeting images. A white coat, a lab full of broken beakers, a nameplate turned upside down. Guilt. One lantern swung as I passed beneath it, knocking gently against my shoulder. I froze. The air around it tasted like copper and salt, and I realized the light inside wasn't fire at all. It was a small, shrunken face, eyeless, mouth open in a silent scream, preserved, a warning or a trophy. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Something in my throat had locked tight. All I could do was keep walking, deeper into the forest's throat, while that cold, death-scented mist wrapped tighter around my ankles like a tether. The forest floor shifted beneath me, the soil becoming spongy, breathing in slow pulses. I knelt instinctively, placing a hand to the earth. It was warm, and beneath the warmth, a rhythm, slow, heavy, unmistakable, heartbeat. I was walking on something alive. The mist parted ahead. Another clearing, this one ringed with standing stones, their surfaces cracked and humming faintly. In the center stood a figure, cloaked and still. I hesitated, fingers tightening on the broken lantern's cold metal handle, the last warmth of its flame long since gone. She turned. It was me, or something that wore my shape, my face, but smoother, cleaner, untouched by frost or fear. Its eyes were black pits, not empty, but full of the forest, of roots and rot, of time that didn't move forward, but curled inward, like dead leaves. The twin raised its hand, my hand, and behind it, the ground split open. Roots tore free like veins, writhing, pulling something massive from the earth. A twisted carcass of branches and bones, a grotesque monument of offerings bound together by forest sinew. The bone-bark beast was not one creature. It was many, all of them, all who had come before and failed. Fused, it watched me through 100 hollow eyes, and the twin whispered, "The curse was never in the forest." It stepped aside. "It was in you." And then the beast moved. It didn't lunge, didn't roar, it shuddered, and the entire clearing trembled. Roots lashed out, not toward me, but toward the stones. The sigils ignited, blue fire racing along ancient carvings, casting ghost light onto the frostbitten canopy above. My legs collapsed, not from fear, from weight. The whisper inside me was no longer passive. It screamed. Visions tore through me. Rituals performed in these very woods. Blood drawn willingly and otherwise. Children buried beneath trees marked by the spiral. Scientists dragged screaming into the soil as their theories died with them. A line unbroken, and me at the end of it. The last, the only one who still remembered what was lost, what was forbidden, the only one cursed not by the forest, but by truth. My body twisted, bones shifting, as though preparing for something. The ground opened again, and the forest spoke. One must remain. One must carry. One must feed. And all around me, the trees leaned in, to listen, to choose. The twin stepped forward, smiling, and I understood then. The forest wasn't waiting to consume me. It was waiting to make me its mouth. The trees did not move. Not in the way trees are meant to. They leaned, not creaked, not swayed, but bent. An unnatural, reverent stoop toward the clearing, as though some ancient command had been whispered into their roots. I could feel the forest's breath around me, low and rhythmic, as if the earth itself were drawing air into lungs too massive to fathom, lungs that had slumbered beneath centuries of soil and bone. The twin extended her hand, my hand. Every inch of her perfect skin was an insult. She bore no scars, no history, no burden. But her smile carried rot. That smile told me she knew me down to my core. Every secret I had buried beneath the frostbitten soil of failed ambition and shame. It was not an invitation she offered. It was a verdict. I staggered back. My legs protested. Not from pain, but resistance. The same subtle refusal I'd felt earlier, as if my body belonged to something else. Now, something ancient and half awake. Every breath I took was colder than the last, and my lungs began to ache with it. Frost forming in my throat, like the forest was icing over my ability to scream. The bone-bark beast reared, its form clearer now in the firelight of the sigils. It was a cathedral of horror, limbs fused at grotesque angles, bark-like skin twisted with veins that pulsed with sap the color of old blood. Its mouth was wrong. It split vertically, a wound filled with jagged bones that clacked softly as if tasting the air. Its claws dragged furrows in the earth, and with every step, the mist thickened. That smell, gods, that smell, it hit me like a tide. Decay layered upon decay, the sour sweetness of rotted marrow, the copper of long-dried blood, the sour ammonia of death, left too long in the cold. My eyes watered, and bile surged in my throat. I should have run, but where? The forest was no longer just trees. It was walls, corridors, a pulsing maze, shifting with each heartbeat of the thing beneath. I could feel it now. The guardian, not just the beast, but something deeper, something bound, its awareness pressed against mine, like fingers pushing through soft clay. And then I heard them, the voices again, but closer, louder, right in my ear, not just whispers this time, but words I could almost understand, chanted in a tongue that tugged at my memory like a childhood rhyme. Heard too young, they spoke of hunger, of bargains, of doors left open by hands too curious to leave them shut. Break the curse, bind the bearer. The forest must feed. My knees buckled. The twin knelt beside me, her eyes still bottomless, her presence nauseatingly calm. She reached out and placed her fingers to my chest, just above my heart, and I felt it, a knot of heat buried deep, something not mine, something implanted like a seed. You were never meant to leave the lab, she said in my voice, softer than the wind. But you looked too far, dug too deep. You fed it knowledge, and now it knows your name. The sigils flared white, the beast bellowed, a sound like 1,000 trees snapping in half at once, and the ground cracked. From beneath the stones, roots lashed out again, not attacking but encircling. They drew a ring around us, a living seal, and then the shrine's stone pieces emerged again from the earth, reassembling in slow motion behind us, like time reversing, rebuilding the altar I had seen before. The twins stood and began walking toward it. It must be bound again, she said, by blood, my blood. The voices returned, now layered with memories not mine, echoes of past bearers, past sacrifices. I saw a woman clawing at the forest floor, dragging herself through the mist as the beast consumed her children. I saw a man carving runes into his own flesh, sobbing prayers to gods who did not answer. I saw a child, no older than 6, eyes black with knowledge she should never have possessed, whispering the spiral symbol over and over as her bones cracked and rearranged themselves. I screamed, and it wasn't my scream. It came from my mouth, but it wasn't mine. It was something else, screaming through me. The pain came next, sharp, precise. My left hand burned as though something inside had caught flame. I looked down and saw the sigil carved into my palm, branded in glowing red, not cut. Grown. The skin around it writhed, trying to heal and failing, caught in a loop of constant agony. The twin approached the altar. She placed a single hand on its cold surface, and the air twisted. The beast lowered its massive head and moaned, a sound that vibrated through my bones, like the forest itself was mourning. Choose, she said. I didn't understand. Choose what? Who will stay? She replied, stepping aside. One must remain. One must carry. And behind me, I heard movement. Another figure stood at the edge of the circle, obscured by mist. As it stepped forward, I saw the shape of a man, weathered and pale, with eyes that flickered like the lanterns, faint, blue, lost. Dr. Elias. I hadn't spoken his name in years. He had vanished decades ago, swallowed by these same woods. A cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors at research facilities and universities, a brilliant mind undone by obsession. His face had not aged, but it had hollowed, thinned, frayed around the edges like paper left too long in water. He looked at me with recognition, with pity. "You broke the seal," he said. "Now you must seal it again." The altar glowed, the forest groaned, and the twins' eyes, now gleaming with something far older than malice, locked onto mine. Feed it, or become it. My legs moved, of their own accord, toward the altar, toward fate. My feet betrayed me. I didn't command them to move. The steps I took toward the altar were not made with will but with resignation, a slow unraveling of resistance, as if every thread of self had been carefully cut, leaving only the husk behind to walk the ritual path. The weight of Elias' gaze on my back was unbearable, heavier than the forest's silence, heavier than the air thick with ancient rot and unspoken debt. The altar pulsed. Its surface was no longer cold stone but living tissue, dark and slick, veined with crimson light that throbbed in time with the heartbeat. I felt beneath the earth. The runes along its edges shifted as I approached, the language of the old forest reconfiguring to greet me, to accept me. They formed something like my name, but not my name, a version of it that belonged to this place, translated into bark and shadow. Behind me, the bone-bark beast coiled, not moving closer, just coiling, like a serpent wrapping itself around the world, its claws sinking into the soil as if preparing to root. Its form was too large now, too unreal. Looking at it felt like staring through glass smeared with memories. Its limbs flickered between trees and bones, its head a patchwork of elk skull and human jaw, its breath made of fog that hissed and spoke. You were warned. I placed my hand on the altar. The sigil in my palm flared, and the pain returned in full, bit down on a scream. Blood ran from between my fingers and was immediately absorbed into the altar, which let out a low, contented sigh, as if exhaling centuries of hunger in one breath. Elias stepped forward, but the mist recoiled from him like an injured animal. He stopped just short of the circle, unwilling or unable to pass through. I tried to bind it alone, he whispered. Thought knowledge was enough. Thought I could reason with it, contain it. His eyes, God's, his eyes, they shimmered with broken light, as if the lanterns in the trees had made homes behind them. I became the ward, Nancy. I've stood at the edge of its teeth for decades, keeping it at bay, feeding it with scraps of what I remembered. But I'm fading, The forest is forgetting me. A shudder passed through the clearing. The altar drank deeper. The twin knelt on the opposite side. Mimicking my posture, she looked up at me. And this time the smile was gone. In its place, anticipation, hunger. Yes, but also grief. It was never meant to be bound forever, she said. Only delayed, kept asleep. But you woke it. You reached through the veil with your science and your pride and tore open the cage with questions no one should ask. We were trying to help, I murmured, the words tasting like ash. Then bleed more. The altar pulled at me, not physically, but spiritually. I felt pieces of myself unhooking, drawn into its depth. Flashes again, the lab at dusk, the red spiral on the chalkboard, my team arguing, the drone feed going black over the forest canopy, my hands shaking as I initiated the last signal, the path, the flickering lantern. That was the trigger. Not the shrine, not the symbols. Me. The knowledge, the intention. I had invited it in. I tried to pull away, but my hand was fused to the altar now. The veins from it had crawled up my wrist, threading beneath the skin, turning my blood black with sap. There must always be a bearer, Elias said. His voice trembled. One who remembers, one who binds, but the longer the guardian sleeps, the more it dreams, and its dreams are becoming real. The ground opened behind me, not a crack. An eye, vast and lidless, lined with roots for lashes, and glowing with a red so deep, it devoured the light, the earth's pupil. It saw me. The twin rose. She began to chant, and the words made the trees convulse. The language was older than speech, filled with meaning. I could feel crawling down my spine. The beast echoed her sounds, its voice a low, guttural harmony that made my bones vibrate. Nancy, Elias said. Louder now. You still have a choice. The altar was dragging more than blood now. It was dragging memory, self. I felt the edges of my identity begin to fray. Take me instead. The words were out before I could think. Everything froze. The twin stopped chanting. Elis' eyes widened. The beast cocked its head. Let it take me, I said again. Louder. Almost daring it. You want a bearer? You want a mouth? Then I choose. I choose to stay. The trees leaned further. The forest listened. Elias stepped forward. Horrified. You don't know what you're offering. Yes, I said. I do, the altar responded. The roots wrapped tighter. My blood boiled. The eye in the earth widened, and the beast groaned a sound that might have been laughter or mourning. And then I saw the spiral, not carved, not burned, grown beneath my skin, crawling from my palm up my arm, twisting through flesh and vein. The mark of the chosen. The forest had accepted me, and in the distance, something ancient began to wake. The spiral writhed beneath my skin like a brand that had never fully cooled, alive, sentient, remembering. With each breath I took, it grew, blooming across my ribs and chest in looping tendrils of black and red, the ink of some forgotten god tattooed into flesh. I could no longer tell where pain ended and awareness began. The sensations fused, indistinguishable and eternal. The altar no longer needed my hand. It pulsed without it now, beating with its own rhythm, a second heart, tethered to the one in my chest. Something ancient had been acknowledged, and in the language of this place, acknowledgement was binding. Elias stood just outside the ring of coiled roots, his lips moving in quiet protest. He was praying. I recognized the pattern, though not the words. He was reciting a mnemonic from the old archives, an incantation buried in research logs disguised as data. My work, my legacy. The beast was still, not out of mercy, but in reverence. Its clawed limbs folded beneath it, and it bowed its head low to the eye in the earth, which remained open, dilated, hungry. The twin came closer. Her footsteps didn't disturb the mist. Her presence was heavier now, like the gravity around her had deepened. You have been accepted, she said. The forest remembers your name. It has shaped itself around your breath. I should have felt pride, or fear, or madness. I felt nothing. You asked questions, she continued, her voice gentler now. You tore open the veil with logic and light and circuit boards. But knowledge is not a gift. It is a seed. You have planted it, and now the forest will grow its truth inside you. I staggered, but not from pain, from understanding. We hadn't found the curse. We were the curse. Every test, every signal, every synthetic frequency sent into the soil. We disrupted the balance, not uncovered a secret, but triggered a memory, one buried deep in root and bone. The guardian wasn't merely a creature. It was the immune system of something larger, older, protective, and now it had activated. And I was the pathogen. The trees around us began to sway, not with wind, but in agreement. Their branches creaked out of rhythm with each other, like a crowd of broken marionettes, slowly finding their rhythm. The forest itself was speaking. We called it the bone-bark beast, I whispered. But the name felt childish now, small, a symbol we'd painted over something too vast to name. The twin smiled. That is not its name. That is your fear. The roots surged from the ground again, this time gently. They didn't grab or attack, but cradled my legs, lifted me. I hovered a foot above the altar. Now, the spiral on my chest, glowing like an ember waiting for wind. I remember, I said, not aloud. Inwardly, the forest didn't need sound. I remembered the first transmission, the strange glyphs in the data packets, the way we dismissed them as interference, as feedback from the Earth's magnetic field. And I remembered the flickering lanterns in our dreams, the way we all began to have the same vision, the path, the cabin, the twin. The path had never flickered. We had vibrated out of alignment with the human world, stepping into a plane where thought became root, memory became mold, and sin was measured not in guilt, but in echoes. This was no longer Nova Scotia, no longer Fundy National Park. This was somewhere else entirely. What happens now? I asked. The twin did not answer. Instead, she pressed her forehead to mine. I saw everything. The first bearer, pale-skinned and screaming as the altar accepted her in fire. The old settlers, praying to something they thought was God as their crops withered and the trees listened. The Micmac elders, carving sigils into bone and burying them deep. Their knowledge stolen, rewritten by outsiders who never understood the depth of what they were undoing. The scientists, my team, vanishing one by one in the mist, consumed not with violence but purpose, swallowed by a forest that needed to remember itself. I screamed. The altar did not echo my scream. It sang, a resonant, thunderous sound, a frequency deeper than language. The spiral on my chest opened, not physically, but perceptually. My body remained intact, but my mind split wide, and through that wound poured understanding. I saw the forest not as trees, but as a mind, every trunk a thought, every branch a history, every leaf a whisper. The guardian was not its master, it was its mouthpiece, its gatekeeper. And now I was becoming the next. The bonebark beast stood. It approached the altar in reverent silence. The ground trembled with each step, not from weight, but recognition. Its claws curled inward, no longer weapons but offerings. It bowed, and for a moment, I understood its sadness. It had been alone for centuries. Elias stepped forward, desperate. Nancy, you can fight it. You're not too far gone. We can trap it again. We can seal it. But his voice was so small now. I looked at him, not with scorn, not with anger, but with pity. It's not a prison, I said. It's a covenant. The forest shuddered. The roots tightened, and far, far below, in the cold chambers of the earth where light could never reach, the true guardian stirred. The altar burst into light. The spiral flared one last time, and then there was only dark. There was no light, not the kind the eyes understand. No flickering of lanterns, no moon through the boughs, no warmth of firelight in forgotten cabins, only dark, not as absence but presence, a living thing thick and viscous, coiling through my lungs with every breath, binding around thought like a funeral shroud. Time fractured. I don't know how long I existed there, between pulses of something vast and ancient, listening to the slow heartbeat of the forests. True core. It wasn't sleep. It wasn't death. It was waiting. And in the waiting, the forest spoke to me. Not in words, in memory. I remembered crawling through roots that twitched like muscle, slick with sap, that smelled of old bones and forgotten oaths. I remembered faces my team but changed, their eyes empty, their limbs grown long and wrong, their mouths filled with bark, whispering equations rewritten and wrought. They reached for me not with malice but with need. They were trying to remember themselves through me. trying to return. But the forest did not release what it claimed. When I emerged, if that's what it was, I found myself standing beneath the canopy again, though the sky above was gone. No stars, no moon, just a soft red glow pulsing from the soil, as if the ground itself had turned inside out. My skin was different, not in texture or color, but in feeling. I could sense things through it, vibrations in the bark above, breaths in the mist. I could hear the thoughts of the trees, not in language, but in intent. Elias was gone. No footprints. No sound of retreat, only the echo of his voice, circling endlessly. You still have a choice, but choices are for those outside the spiral. The altar was dormant now, empty. The veins that had once pulsed across its surface were dry, flaking. Whatever it had needed from me, it had taken. I was no longer guest nor sacrifice. I was part of the system now. The bonebark beast lingered at the edge of the clearing, half in shadow, half in the low red light. Its body was breaking apart, its bark skin shedding like autumn leaves, its limbs trembling with age or relief. It looked at me not as predator or guardian, but as successor. And then it spoke. Its voice was not sound. It was pressure, a low groan through the ground that rattled my teeth and stretched my veins. It dreams again. Those words filled my head like smoke. I saw them in the trees, in the swirl of mist that rose like steam from the soil. The forest was dreaming, and in its dreams I saw the future it intended. Roots beneath cities, fungal mines blooming beneath data centers, power lines wrapped in ivy that whispered back to the grid. Humanity rewritten, rebalanced, not destroyed, but digested, reincorporated, remembered. I stumbled away from the altar, unsure if I moved by will or by guidance. The spiral in my chest had faded, but its shape lingered in my bones. Every step I took left a mark in the soil that pulsed briefly, like a wound. I thought of the cabin. I thought of the warm fire, of the fresh scent of pine, the moment that seemed like the beginning but had always been the end. That's when I saw her, the twin, not across from me, not outside of me, through me. She wore my face now, fully, completely, no shimmer, no subtle mimicry. She looked as I once did, before the spiral, before the veil lifted. She smiled. "This is how it begins again," she said. Her voice was mine. "You will leave the woods. You will forget enough to speak, but not enough to save. And when they follow your path, when they build their towers and carve their roads and feed their satellites with forest blood," she stepped forward, "the forest will remember, and it will hunger." Backed away. The trees parted behind me. A path opened. Lanterns flickered in the distance. I turned and found myself staring down the same forgotten trail I had once followed into the heart of this place. The forest had built it anew. Not for me, for the next. "You are the guide now," she whispered. "You are the trigger." My mouth was dry. I tried to scream, to run, to warn. The sound caught in my throat, like splinters. My legs moved, the spiral burned, and the forest smiled. Behind me, the bone-bark beast let out a final sigh and collapsed into dust. Ahead, the cabin waited. The fire would be warm. I don't remember leaving the forest. Not in the way one remembers a road or a turn, a moment of arrival or escape. It was more like surfacing from beneath a frozen lake. Lungs bursting, thoughts scattered. Every instinct screaming that the ice overhead had never been real at all. One moment I stood beneath trees that whispered secrets through their leaves. The next I was on a road slick with frost. Headlights stuttering through the mist behind me. No one asked where I'd come from. No one asked why I walked barefoot. Caked in ash and soil, blood dried in my hair like forgotten prayers. They looked at me, then looked away. Some innate survival reflex steering their eyes elsewhere, sensing the forest in my breath, the rot in my marrow. The hospital was sterile and kind, lights too bright, questions too soft. I gave them a name, not mine. Nancy Forsyth had disappeared in Frostfield. That much the news reports confirmed. She was presumed dead after the rest of her research team vanished without a trace. The search party found the cabin empty, the fire cold, but not for me. For me, it had still been warm. I watched interviews with myself on old archival footage, stuttering over theories, scribbling over chalkboards, pacing across labs lit by fluorescence that now made my skin itch. I saw a woman who had believed knowledge was salvation, who had thought every mystery could be mapped, categorized, solved. That woman was dead. The spiral beneath my ribs still pulsed, not visibly, not to others, but I felt it, like a second heartbeat, like a door. I lived in a small flat now, away from cities, away from signals. The walls were lined with books. I no longer read. Their words tasted of dust and forgetting. I kept the lights low, the curtains drawn. Plants grew wild along the windowsill. Never watered, never pruned, they bloomed in strange ways. I dreamed of the forest every night. Sometimes, I woke up standing at the edge of the trees, barefoot again, breath steaming in the moonlight. The woods never spoke then. They didn't need to. Their invitation had already been given. And sometimes I didn't wake up at all, not in the way we understand it. Sometimes I returned, lived entire lifetimes in the spiral, bore witness to the forest's rebirth in bone and root and bark. I stood over cities, overgrown with memory. I saw machines rust into mycelium. I heard the voices of the dead bloom through moss-covered satellite dishes. The forest was not just reclaiming, it was rewriting. One night, I followed a flicker in the corner of my vision, a spark that danced along the hallway of my building, too fluid for electricity, too silent for flame. It slipped beneath a neighbor's door, and I felt my body follow, not with steps, but with certainty. Inside, the air was cold. The man sat hunched over his desk, staring at blueprints, engineering specs, fiber optic layouts, expansion plans for infrastructure through Fundy's southern reach. He didn't hear me. I stepped closer. The spiral throbbed. He began to hum softly, tunelessly, and then he turned his head, slowly, and looked straight through me. "There was a cabin," he said. I nodded. The fire was still warm. My breath caught. He blinked, suddenly confused, eyes clearing, like a man waking from a dream he hadn't known he'd fallen into. He looked around. He didn't see me anymore. I left without touching the door. The path was open again. They were dreaming. All of them. The forest had grown through me, and now it spread in whispers, in glances, in forgotten words muttered under breath, in sterile boardrooms. I wasn't the only one marked. I was just the first. They came to me sometimes. The others, researchers, park rangers, curious minds. They asked about the project, about what Wade'd been studying, about the signal. I always gave them the same answer. There was no signal, only silence. But silence is a container, and the forest has learned how to fill it. Last week, I saw Alias, not in the flesh, in the mirror. His face flickered over mine. Tired, old, rimmed with mold and sorrow. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear it. But the spiral in my chest twisted like a vine in wind. I understood. He was still inside. So were the rest. The twin stands across from me now, most nights, not outside my apartment, but in reflections, in windows, in puddles. She never speaks. She only waits for the right one, for the next step, for the breath that triggers the next bloom. The forest is patient. It doesn't want war. It wants memory. And it is so hungry. The night air tasted of ash and broken promises. As I stood once more at the edge of Fundy National Park, the chill creeping through my coat like a living thing. The mist was thick, thicker than any I'd known, wrapping around me like the cold breath of something old and patient, something that had been waiting just beneath the surface of the world since time itself began to forget. Behind me, the road wound away, fading into nothingness, swallowed by shadows and silence. Ahead, the trees stood like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at the dark sky, restless with hunger. I held the flickering lantern tight, its weak glow casting long, trembling shadows that danced with the mist. Shadows that seemed to writhe, to pulse with a life of their own, as if the very forest leaned in to watch. Every step I took was heavy with the weight of 1,000 whispered warnings, unheard voices slipping through the fog like venomous breath, telling me to turn back, to run, to forget. But I could not. I was bound not by chains, but by the invisible spiral carved deep within my flesh. The curse that no science could untangle and no reason could explain. The bone-bark beast stirred somewhere beyond the veil of trees, a hulking silhouette of bark and bone, its claws scraping the earth in a sound that echoed like the slow, relentless ticking of a death watch beetle. Its eyes gleamed with hollow hunger, a void that swallowed light and hope alike. the cold mist wrapped tighter around my ankles, rising now to lap at my knees, carrying with it that unmistakable scent, death and decay, the breath of rot buried beneath centuries of frost. It was the forest's promise, a reminder that nothing escaped its grasp forever. Suddenly, the lantern's flame faltered, flickering wildly, as if caught in a silent scream. The path ahead, once faintly visible, dissolved into an abyss of shadows. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat a drum summoning something far older and more terrible than fear. From the darkness emerged the twin, her eyes like polished obsidian, reflecting all the sins of the woods. She stepped forward, without a sound, her presence both a comfort and a condemnation. "The forest is alive," she whispered, voice threading through the mist like a serpent's hiss. "It remembers every betrayal, every forgotten promise. It hungers not just for flesh, but for the very essence of those who dared disturb its sleep." I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the spiral within me tightened, a living noose drawing me closer to the heart of the ancient curse. The bone-bark beast came then, its massive form towering, claws outstretched, not in violence, but in invitation. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and the mist swirled into a cyclone of decay and whispered names, the names of those lost, consumed, reborn in the endless cycle of the forest's hunger. And I understood at last. This was no mere creature of bark and bone. It was the forest made flesh, the guardian, the avenger, the memory incarnate. The lantern finally died, plunging me into darkness as the cold mist rose higher, swallowing sound and sight and hope. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. Story 3. The branches groaned like old bones in the wind. I had only taken 3 steps off the gravel turnout when I heard it. A low, creaking sigh that rolled through the black limbs of the pisca trees. Soft but sharp enough to quicken my breath. It wasn't the cry of the wind alone. No, there was a texture to it. The sound of something weary, ancient, and discontented. The trailhead sign behind me had faded into silhouette now, swallowed by the dimming light. And with every footfall forward, the forest seemed to swallow sound in layers, stripping away the distant hum of the road, the last birdsong, and even the occasional gust. I stood still, breath fogging in the air, and listened. The hoot of an owl punctured the silence. Low, questioning, it echoed through the cold air, like a voice testing the edge of language, and was answered, not by another owl. What rose in reply was wrong, a discordant symphony of sounds, high and low, human and not, echoing from some unseen throat. It didn't echo like birdsong. It spilled a wet, dragging chorus of overlapping calls. Too many voices layered on top of each other like waterlogged pages glued into a single unreadable book. It crawled across the tree trunks, vibrated through my boots, and slipped down into my spine with a familiarity that sickened me, like remembering a scream I hadn't realized I'd heard before. I should further turned back. I should followed every instinct that screamed against stepping into those woods. But I had come too far, not just in miles, but in belief. Belief in the voices I'd heard at the edge of sleep. For months now, the strange fragments of dream messages left like fingerprints on my skull, each whispering the same plea beneath layers of gibberish. Free us. My name is Harold Finch. I am not a fool, but I am a man of faith, not in churches, not in doctrine, but in something older. The breath between words, the space behind your reflection, the cold wind that smells like soil and sorrow. I have lived my life quietly, seeking to understand the things most people would rather pretend they don't feel when the lights go out. Bleak Haven, North Carolina, was not a town that welcomed such curiosity. Still, the dead had brought me here. The forest thickened around me, not just with trees, but with a kind of awareness. Something just out of view, watching, weighing, measuring every breath I took with cold, ancient patience. The dirt path beneath my boots had narrowed to little more than a depression in the leaf-littered earth, winding between gnarled trunks that leaned toward one another like conspirators in some forgotten trial, though the sky above was still a bruised shade of twilight. The canopy stretched so densely overhead that it might as well have been midnight. I walked slowly, deliberately, not for fear of tripping, but because each step felt like an intrusion. My every motion stirred unseen particles of dust, memory, decay. I could smell it now, a damp, mossy musk, like wet stone left in a closed tomb. Every so often, the wind would shift and bring with it a sharper tang, the acrid bitterness of ash, the metallic sweetness of something older, like rusted iron and violets rotting underfoot. A half-mile in, the trail abruptly dipped. Roots jutted from the earth, like the ribs of buried things, slick with moisture and age. I crouched low to duck beneath a half-fallen hemlock, its trunk twisted in on itself, like a spine snapped mid-convulsion. The tree groaned as I passed under it, a groan that echoed the one I'd heard at the trailhead, though this time it felt closer, fuller, as if something had exhaled directly into my ear. I turned my head sharply, certain I'd heard breathing behind me. There was nothing, but the air was wrong now. Heavier, taut, like skin stretched too tight across a frame. I stepped off the trail for a moment, boots sinking slightly into the loamy floor. As I approached a break in the trees, where a shaft of fading light still touched the moss, and there, beneath a cluster of blackened birches, I found them. Bones, not scattered, not half-buried or gnawed. A circle of femurs, ribs, jawbones, some human, some too long, too thin, too sharp. At the center, a single sun-bleached skull with its jaw pried wide in a silent scream. Twine, or something like it, was threaded through the eye sockets and wrapped taut around a stone cairn just behind it. The stone was wet with something dark that hadn't yet dried. My chest tightened. I felt it again. The pressure behind the veil of sight, like staring at a painting too long until the shadows start to move. I didn't touch the bones. I didn't speak. I just stood there, held in place by some ancient etiquette I dared not break. And then the owl hooted again. Only this time, the answer came from the right behind me. A dozen voices burst forth in unison. Not loud, not shrieking, but close. Too close. A sound like air escaping lungs that had held breath for centuries. Words overlapped, unintelligible, layered like static on a dead channel. My knees buckled. I turned. There was nothing. No one. But the trees had changed. They were closer now. The trail was gone, and in the distance, something moved, not walking, not running, but gliding between the trunks. I took one step back, and the skull in the circle twitched, its jawbone clattering softly against the rock. I didn't scream, but I should have. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the circle of bones, breath shallow, limbs rigid, the back of my neck crawling with the sensation of being watched, not in passing, not distantly, but studied with meticulous intent, like prey beneath a microscope. The forest had grown quiet again, unnaturally so, as if the air itself was bracing for some unseen thing to move. My heartbeat echoed loud in my ears, a pulsing rhythm that did little to comfort me. Eventually, I moved, slowly, carefully, like a man, trying not to wake something sleeping just beneath the leaves. I backed away from the bone circle, refusing to turn my back on it until I'd put at least 10 paces between myself and that grisly arrangement. Every inch of forest around me looked the same. Black bark, moss-slicked stone, and shifting shadows. But I could no longer see where the trail had been. The forest had folded over itself. I checked my compass. It spun twice, stuttered, then settled in a direction I didn't trust. That simple lie, that pull of magnetic certainty, felt more violating than the bone circle, because it meant I was no longer in a place that followed the rules of the world I'd come from. I took a slow breath, closed my eyes, whispered the name I had been given in my dreams. Kala. The wind picked up almost immediately, brushing cold across my face, as though the forest had exhaled. Then, a rustle. Not leaves, fabric. I turned. There, caught on a crooked branch, was a piece of red cloth, faded and fraying, torn at the edges like it had been ripped in a panic. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The moment I touched it, a voice, low, breathless, unmistakably human, murmured from behind a tree directly to my left. He's still hungry. I didn't run. Couldn't. My legs refused. I turned my head slowly toward the voice. Nothing. But the bark on that tree had changed. Deep gouges, 4 parallel slashes running vertically, as though made by claws. Wide ones, the spacing unnatural, as if whatever had made them had fingers longer than my hand. The wounds in the tree oozed a sap so dark it looked black in the fading light. I walked again, more urgently now, not caring about direction, just wanting movement. My boots sloshed through something wet, a shallow ditch, thick with dead leaves, and something slicker beneath them. A shape floated past. My foot hit bone. I didn't stop to look. Not this time. The sun had fully gone. I couldn't see the sky, only treetops strangled by vine and fog. I pulled my flashlight from my pack and flicked it on. The beam was weak, too narrow, barely enough to cut through the mist that had begun to rise, but it was better than nothing. I kept walking. The temperature dropped, and with it, a new sound emerged. A low, warbling moan that didn't come from any direction I could name. It didn't move through the forest, like sound should. It settled inside me, in my throat, in my chest. A howl, but not from any wolf I'd ever heard. This one was fragmented. It came in syllables, stuttering, like a broken chant. Some part of it was almost singing, like a dirge forced through a creature that didn't understand melody, but had learned it from the dead. Then, a flash of white light. Blinding. I cried out, stumbling, dropping the flashlight. As my vision seared to white, the beam spun wildly, catching branches, glimpses of bark, and then something tall, wrong. Not tree, standing far too still. Darkness returned, as fast as it had vanished. But I wasn't alone. Something breathed behind me. I didn't dare turn around, not at first. Whatever had breathed behind me, whatever had filled the air with that low, ragged exhale, it was waiting. I could feel its presence the way you feel a spider crawling just above your skin, invisible, but undeniable. The hairs on my arms stood up like needles, and the breath I held behind clenched teeth burned in my chest. Slowly, I pivoted, one boot grinding silently into the damp earth. I aimed my flashlight, its flickering beam jittery from my trembling hand, and swept it behind me. Empty woods, but only just. Between two trees, no more than 20 feet away, was a shape tall, narrow, motionless. The beam caught its outline for the briefest moment, and I swear on everything I've ever known, it didn't move with the light, didn't recoil or flinch. It simply absorbed the attention, like darkness wearing the illusion of form. No face, no detail. But I knew it was looking at me, and then it was gone. Not moved. Gone. No rustle. No snap of branches. Just the empty space where something had stood. As if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. My legs finally obeyed. I bolted, the beam bouncing wildly ahead of me, lighting only slashes of bark and lichen-covered trunks, each one twisting in the dark, like the warped ribs of some great buried beast. My breath came in wet gasps, louder than I wanted, echoing in ways that didn't make sense. The trees blurred around me, too close, too fast, until suddenly I stumbled into a clearing, wide, open, wrong. The trees around it formed a near-perfect circle, as though something had carved it out with the tip of a massive compass. The ground here was bare, no underbrush, No leaves, only cracked soil and patches of sickly moss glowing faintly in the dark. The wind stopped the moment I crossed its edge. All sound stopped. Even my breathing felt muted, as though muffled by thick glass. And at the center of the clearing stood a tree, but it wasn't like the others. This one was dead, twisted beyond nature, gnarled into a spiral of limbs that reached upward like snapped fingers clawing for a sky that no longer noticed them. The bark was blackened, blistered, and veined with deep grooves that glowed faintly red, as if something beneath pulsed with slow, poisonous blood. Something hung from its branches, bundles of twine and cloth, knotted like crude dolls spinning gently without wind. I stepped forward, drawn not by curiosity, but by that same dream urge that had brought me here in the first place. That whisper that felt like memory. As I approached, I noticed something etched into the bark. Symbols, rough and chaotic, carved deep. And recently, they were not of any language I knew, but they felt familiar, like something I'd seen in the corner of my eye too many times to dismiss. At the base of the tree lay a satchel, leather, old, worn down by weather, but intact. I knelt slowly and reached for it. The second I touched the strap, a scream erupted from the tree above me. Not a sound through the air. A sound in my head, screeching, metallic, 1,000 voices dragging fingernails across my thoughts. I fell back, eyes clenched, clutching the sides of my skull. My flashlight clattered to the dirt. The dolls hanging above me began to spin wildly, fast and chaotic, as if caught in some invisible current, their cloth limbs flailing like drowning men. Then, all at once, silence. When I opened my eyes again, the clearing had changed. The tree was still there. So was the satchel. But the dolls, gone. In their place hung bones, small, human, suspended from sinew, and still dripping with something wet. I looked down at my hands. The strap of the satchel was still in my grasp. The leather had fused to my skin and sat into the distance. Deeper in the forest, the howl came again, longer this time, more human. I don't remember standing. One moment I was crouched in the dirt, staring in disbelief at the strap fused into the skin of my palm, and the next I was upright again, breathless, the satchel heavy at my side like a parasite I hadn't consented to carry. The forest around the clearing hadn't changed, and yet it felt different, closer, hungrier. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line with a sick, rising certainty that if I looked too fast, if I moved too suddenly, I would see something I wasn't supposed to. Something that didn't mind being seen but wouldn't allow me to forget it. The bone howl came again, clearer this time. Closer. It didn't sound like a single creature. It sounded like a dozen, no, hundreds, of voices caught in the throat of something trying to mimic a howl. Women and men and children, all straining in unison, howling through torn vocal cords in a dissonant chorus, and underneath it all, a low growl, that wasn't voice at all, but something deeper, older, like the earth itself was dreaming of wolves. The satchel pulsed. I flinched and nearly dropped it. But my hand wouldn't release the strap. It was as though it had become part of me. Bone threaded into leather, sinew woven into flesh. My fingertips burned as if brushed by fire. I could feel it now. Whatever was inside, not in a physical sense. There was no weight shift, no shifting contents, but in the same way you feel a storm building behind a distant ridge. I opened the flap. Inside was a bundle wrapped in coarse cloth, stained dark in places. Symbols marked the fabric in rust-colored ink, the same ones etched into the bark of the twisted tree. I hesitated, then unwrapped it slowly. A jawbone. Human. Clean, carved with tiny, delicate etchings that shimmered faintly in the weak light of my dying flashlight. As I stared at it, I felt it hum in my hand, the vibration rising up my arm, into my teeth, into my eyes. Words bloomed in the back of my mind, not spoken, but imprinted like ash on a cold hearth. Bury it. Beneath the moonless root, speak not, look not, bleed willingly. The message left a taste in my mouth. Copper and mildew, like old pennies, pressed the tongue. A sound snapped me out of my trance. Footsteps, not far, slow. Measured. Deliberate. I killed the flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. The only light now came from the faint red glow of the runes on the jawbone. I crouched low and pressed my back against a nearby tree, holding my breath. The steps drew closer. Something tall passed through the clearing. Not quickly, not hesitantly. It moved like it knew I was there, but wasn't in a hurry. I could hear its breathing now. A low rattle, like lungs filled with water, the kind of breath a body only makes when it's forgotten how to be alive, but hasn't figured out how to die. Then, silence. I waited, trembling, unsure if the creature had gone, or if it was simply waiting for me to move. When I finally dared to look up, I saw it. High in the trees, a figure, hunched in the upper branches, limbs bent wrong, bones pressing against thin, pale skin, as if desperate to escape it. Its face was obscured by a mask. No, not a mask. A skull, human, worn like a hood. And beneath it, eyes, too many eyes, glimmering faintly, watching in every direction at once. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just hung there. And then the skull grinned, not with expression, but with sound, a noise like cracking ribs, like something unfolding beneath flesh, rose from the trees and slithered through the forest like oil. The bone howl followed, a sudden, piercing wail that shattered the silence like broken glass. My ears rang. I dropped the jawbone, and in that instant, the satchel yanked forward, dragging me with it, straight toward the base of a rotting tree, whose roots parted slowly, greedily, revealing a hollow too narrow for a man, but somehow perfectly shaped for something else the satchel wanted in. And some part of me, The part that had heard the dreams, followed the signs, reached for something more than reason, wanted it too. I didn't crawl into the hollow. I was taken. The moment the root split wider, with that slow, sinewy motion, like something old yawning, the satchel pulled against me again, not with brute force, but with a terrible gravity, like my will had been unstitched and rewoven with a thread not mine. My fingers, traitorous things, gripped the leather and drew me toward the gap in the tree, knees dragging through black earth damp with rot. The scent of the place grew thick, cloying, sweet and fungal, like the breath of something dead too long beneath the floorboards. The roots closed behind me, not completely, not yet, but enough that the pale light from the clearing bled into shadows and then into nothing. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it flickered once and died, as though the forest had whispered to it, and it obeyed. The only illumination now was the pulsing red glow from the runes on the jawbone, which I found again nestled in the satchel like it had never fallen at all. I moved deeper. The tunnel wound downward, not steeply, but with the heavy insistence of a slope, designed to keep things from coming back up. The walls were roots and packed soil, wet and veined with pale strands that pulsed like arteries. I could feel the heartbeat now, not just the forests, but the thing beneath it. Each step closer sent a pressure into my skull, behind my eyes, a rhythm that wasn't mine, but was syncing with mine all the same. The air grew warm, humid, thick, and then came the whispering. It started as a murmur in the roots. Not language, not yet, but like wind echoing through hollow reeds. Then words began to form, fractured, wrong. He waits, she weeps. They buried their mouths, but the hunger learned to speak. The tunnel opened, not wide, barely more than a chamber, but enough that I could stand. The ceiling curved like a rib cage, and I had the sensation of standing inside something that had once been alive. And in the center of the chamber was a pool, shallow, still, black. Above it, hanging by its arms from chains buried in the root ceiling, was a body. No, not a body, a husk. Desiccated. Skin like parchment stretched over bone. Its eyes had been replaced with moss. Its mouth was sewn shut with hair. The whispering stopped. In that silence, I heard a breath. Not mine. The thing inhaled, long and slow. Its chest rose, just slightly, and from the water below, bubbles surfaced, thick and oily, popping with small sighs. The scent was overwhelming now. Mold, rot, old meat, candle wax. Then the voice came. Harold, it said my name. You brought the mouth? Open it. I dropped to my knees beside the pool. My hands moved without consent. Lifting the jawbone, the runes burned brighter, casting twisted shadows along the chamber walls that danced in patterns too deliberate to be random. Faces flickered there. People I'd never met but knew from dreams, from lives that weren't mine. I held the bone over the pool. Bleed willingly. The whisper again. closer now, in my ear. I drew my pocket knife. The blade trembled in my hand, but not from fear, from anticipation, as if the metal had yearned for this moment, forged not to cut cloth or rope, but to open me. I drew it across my palm. The pain was dull. The blood that welled up wasn't red. It was black. It dripped onto the bone. The runes flared. Not red now, but white, blinding. The air split with a sound like glass grinding against bone. The husk above me spasmed, and its mouth began to tear open. The hair unraveled, the lips split, the jaw cracked audibly, unhinging like a snake, and from that darkness came a sound I will never forget. Not a scream, not a growl, but every sound a human throat was never meant to make. All at once, the walls shook. The pool churned. Something beneath it woke. And then the bone howl answered, not far above now. Not distant. Not wandering. It knew I was beneath it. The scream did not stop. It poured from the husk's mouth like smoke from a collapsing furnace. Thick, resonant, unbroken by breath or mercy, it filled the chamber, pressed against my skull, and made my teeth ache with its sheer, sick resonance. I fell back from the pool, one hand clutched to my still bleeding palm, the other shielding my face from a light that had no source, only presence. The jawbone had sunk into the water, not sunk. Drawn, it descended without a splash, swallowed into the black pool with a strange elegance, like a needle passing through cloth. As it vanished, the glow faded, but the scream did not. The walls wept. I swear they did. Bleeding sap, or some other ichor that smelled of funerals and burnt hair. The husk above me convulsed. Its limbs jerked in arrhythmic spasms, bones cracking under skin that no longer cared to contain them. The moss in its eye sockets writhed like worms. I stared, horrified, as something began to push its way up its throat. A glistening shape, oval and raw, bulging through the already torn mouth. As the scream pitched higher, I should have run. Instead, I stared, hypnotized, frozen, and then pop, the thing burst free. It was a tooth. Just one, large, yellowed, old. It hit the ground beside the pool with a sound far too heavy for its size. The scream stopped. Everything stopped. Silence returned with the finality of a slammed coffin lid. I could hear my breathing. My heart, somewhere, high above, the forest's night sounds had resumed. An owl hooted. Something small skittered over dry leaves. The tunnel was still behind me, but I no longer sensed movement beyond it, only the oppressive weight of a choice made. The husk, now still, sagged in its chains. Whatever force had animated, it was gone, and yet the tooth remained. I reached for it. My hand burned, not from the wound, from proximity, like the air itself was warning me. This is not yours, but I touched it. anyway. The second my fingers closed around it, my vision snapped sideways. Not darkness, not hallucination. Something else, like being yanked through a keyhole into a world shaped from shadow and memory. I stood. No, I was dragged. Through visions, a burning cabin. Deep in these same woods, a woman, barefoot, screaming words in a forgotten tongue as her child was torn from her arms by unseen hands. A clearing. The same one I had entered, except the dolls hanging from the twisted tree were alive, swaying, crying, bleeding. A figure, cloaked in black wolf fur, wearing the jawbone like a crown, its face hidden, its mouth full of other mouths, all whispering, all hungry. Then, a final image, my own face, eyes black, mouth open, and the scream pouring out. I collapsed. My chest heaved, my throat dry and raw, as if I had been the one screaming. The tooth remained in my hand. Cool now, innocent. I slipped it into the satchel without thinking. The tunnel behind me was no longer closed. I rose and walked. The chamber narrowed again, roots curling back like fingers. Letting go of prey, they no longer found appetizing. I emerged into the woods once more, but not the place I had left. The sky overhead was still night, but the stars had changed, brighter, sharper. The trees loomed taller. The air buzzed with a new frequency, like the forest now watched, not just with eyes, but with intent. I had not exited. I had been birthed back into the woods. The satchel was heavier now. Its strap had sunk deeper into my skin, veins darkening around the contact. It was no longer something I carried. It carried me. Ahead, the trees parted. There was a figure in the distance. Pull, standing still. As I approached, I saw she was no older than 16. Her eyes were gone. Empty sockets, weeping soil. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Clutching something I couldn't yet see, she spoke. And though her mouth did not move, I heard her perfectly. You brought the tooth. The first there are 6. Behind me, the bone howl cold again, and this time, I knew it had picked up the scent. The girl vanished. The moment I blinked, one instant, she stood motionless, beneath the bent arms of a dead cedar, her hair moving not with wind, but with some subterranean breath, and the next, the air simply forgot she had ever been there. Only the memory of her words remained. 6 teeth, each syllable, lodged behind my sternum like a splinter. I didn't want to move. The forest ahead lay utterly still, but not in peace. It was the stillness of breath held before the scream, the moment just before the deer bolts into the trees. Sensing eyes it cannot see, I waited for sound, any sound, the cheer of crickets, the wing beat of some night bird. But silence ruled, absolute and swollen. Then the scent came. It drifted from the west, thick and metallic, not blood, Not exactly, but something older, like rusted chains and open graves. It clung to the back of my throat as I turned toward it, and my feet moved as though my bones no longer trusted me to choose where to go. The forest changed with each step. The pines grew thinner, spaced wide, like teeth in a rotted jaw. The earth softened underfoot, spongy with moss and veined with mold. Shapes hung from the branches. Not dolls this time, but sacks of hide, stitched with black thread. They swayed as I passed, and some of them whimpered. One split open, and a stream of white moths poured out, their wings patterned with tiny screaming faces. I didn't run. I couldn't. The satchel throbbed against my side. Warm now, as if flushed with fever, my wound pulsed with it. Each heartbeat, another thread woven deeper between it and me. I knew, without knowing how, that it wanted something, not just the tooth, something else, a piece of what remained of me. I found the second clearing, just before dawn. No sun had risen, but the sky in the east glowed the color of bruised fruit. In the center of the clearing stood a stone monolith, weathered and ancient, covered in the same rust-red script as the jawbone. Around its base were bones, animal, mostly, but not all. Some bore the unmistakable curvature of a human ribcage, others, childlike skulls with tiny holes bored neatly through the forehead. Atop the monolith, balanced with impossible precision, was a second jawbone, wider, sharper. Wolf. I stepped into the clearing, and the moment I did, the wind returned. But it didn't move the trees. It moved me, not with force, but with invitation. It urged, drew, beckoned. I crossed the circle slowly, my boots crunching over brittle bones. The second jawbone watched me, not with eyes, but with memory. It recognized me, knew me, and then movement. From the trees emerged a shape, low to the ground, gaunt, fur the color of rot and old snow. It padded forward on trembling limbs, bones showing through skin stretched too tight. It stopped, only feet from me. The bone-howl wolf. Its mouth was wrong, not just oversized, but layered, jaw upon jaw, each opening revealing another, like a nesting doll made of teeth. When it breathed, the air whistled through the skulls that hung like trophies from its hide. I could see the eyes of the dead flickering behind the sockets. It didn't growl. It spoke. Two. You carry two. I didn't answer. I couldn't. It stepped forward again. I felt the ground vibrate with its weight. Though it looked half-starved, it lowered its head to the monolith and nudged the wolf's jawbone toward me. Then it opened its mouth, the outermost one, and inside, behind its wet, quivering tongue, I saw a third jawbone embedded in the flesh, like a tumor. It wants me to take it. I reached out, hands shaking, and removed the jaw from the stone. It was warm, alive, as I held it. The forest around me shuddered. Trees bent away. The moths screamed again from their hiding places. The bone-howl wolf did not move. I stepped toward it, The scent from its body was unbearable. Not decay, but memory. The smell of mourning clothes buried and dug up again, of regret made flesh. I reached into its mouth, past its fangs, deeper, until I gripped the third jawbone. It pulsed in my grip, like a heart. It didn't fight. It offered. I pulled it free. The wolf let out a sigh that sounded like 100 people exhaling at once. War finished. Its skin unraveled. Its bones turned to ash. In moments, nothing remained but the third jaw and the silence it left behind. I staggered back, both bones now in the satchel, their heat rising, my vision blurred. My skin crawled. In the distance, a new sound echoed. Laughter, not human, not joyful. Laughter from the trees, and the girl's voice carried on the wind. 3 teeth, 3 locks, broken. Then came a creak, deep and shuddering, like a door opening underground, and the forest exhaled. I didn't sleep, even if I had wanted to. The woods would not have allowed it. They watched me now, not just with eyes hidden behind bark and burrow, but with a sentience, thick as sap, viscous in the air, and clinging to every thought I tried to have. The satchel pulsed against my ribs with a slow rhythm, almost soothing, like the heartbeat of something gestating. I walked. The forest no longer resembled anything human. It bent in unnatural geometries, the trees curving not toward the light, but away from it, leaning inward like voyeurs. I saw no path anymore, just terrain that permitted me to pass, tunnels of root and hollow log, thresholds of antlers woven together, mists that parted only when I whispered Harold's name aloud, to remind myself I was still real. The fourth clearing came with no warning. One moment, I was pushing through thorned underbrush that whispered in a language made of teeth, and the next, I was beneath open sky, or what should have been sky. Above me hung not stars, but holes, tears in the fabric of night, each revealing flashes of lives unlived. Rooms filled with people who looked up from supper to stare directly at me, faces slack with confusion. In the center of the clearing stood a crib, wooden, blackened by fire, yet miraculously intact, the kind used 100 years ago, with high sides and iron screws, the sort you'd find in an attic and refuse to touch. Something moved inside it, not a baby, not even a child, something smaller, older. I approached, not with caution, that had long ago abandoned me, but with resignation. Whatever lay ahead, I had already accepted it. The herald that had entered Pisgah was no longer the one walking now. Inside the crib was the fourth jawbone. This one was tiny, a child's, still pink in places, as though recently unearthed. It rested on a small pillow of moss, surrounded by trinkets, a dull shoe, a milk tooth, a rattle carved from bone. As I stared down, the world tilted, and I saw, remembered, the cabin from the vision, the screaming woman, the child taken, This was that child's mouth. I reached in. The moment my fingers touched it, the trees around the clearing snapped to attention, no longer bowed, no longer silent. They groaned and cracked like an orchestra tuning in reverse. Then came the voice. Not the girl, not the wolf. My own voice, but not spoken. Played, like a recording dragged across glass. Harold. It rasped. You were always meant to hear us. I turned. The forest behind me was gone. In its place stood a hallway, an impossible hallway, wallpapered in ash and stitched together from rotting curtains. It stretched infinitely in both directions. Pictures lined the walls, but they didn't show faces. They showed moments from my life. No one else should know. The first seance I'd ever conducted. My mother's deathbed confession. The time I'd almost drowned at age 6 and heard whispering beneath the water. The jawbone in my hand turned to ice. The hallway spoke. You carry 4. The blood debt nears its close. I began to walk, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. My feet obeyed something older than me. With every step, the hallway changed. The wallpaper peeled itself back. The floor became moss again. Trees burst through the ceiling, shedding leaves that whispered names I didn't recognize but somehow mourned. At last, I emerged into another clearing. This one was wrong, not in shape, but in temperature. It was warm here, too warm. The air buzzed with the scent of copper and burning honey. Something had died here recently. Or worse, something had been born. In the center stood a woman, tall, eyes stitched shut, mouth sewn open. Her jaw had been removed. She held it in her hands. The 5th. It was beautiful. In a terrible way, gilded, carved with symbols that twisted the more I looked. Blood dripped from its corners, steaming as it hit the earth. When she saw me, she knelt, offering it forward. I did not want to take it, but my hand moved. The moment I touched it, my ears bled. Sound rushed in. Not music, not words, but the absence of both. The sound of the world before language, before breath. A void made audible. The woman collapsed, dissolving into ash with a whisper I couldn't quite hear. 5, said the forest. Everything trembled. The ground cracked beneath me, splitting wide, revealing not earth, but bone. Miles of it. A subterranean cathedral of skulls and ribs and spines, and somewhere in its center, a pulsing red light. I knew where I had to go. The 6th tooth waited below. The sky above me had vanished. Not just darkened, one to tuber. Knock, as if the very idea of sky had been erased, leaving only an endless oppressive hush that pressed against my chest like water at the ocean floor. I could not remember how long I'd been walking. My legs moved like they belonged to someone else. The air around me had thickened into something almost tactile, clinging to my skin with a moist, fungal heat. The trees no longer looked like trees, not entirely. Their bark had split in places, revealing sinew, black sap oozing like pus from an infected wound. Some trunks pulsed subtly, as if they breathed. I don't remember choosing to climb the hill. My hands were scraped raw, my palms stung with grit and sap, my knees trembling under my weight. But something called from the summit, a thrumming, bone-deep pull that bypassed thought and struck something raw inside me. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I moved. At the crest, a clearing opened like a wound in the earth, surrounded by ringed stones carved with spiral glyphs. Too old for any tongue I knew, they shimmered faintly. Not with light, but memory. Each groove held some echo of pain, some recorded scream etched in lichen. In the center stood a tree, leafless, barkless, tall and bleached as an unburied femur. Dozens of animal skulls hung from its branches, swinging gently though there was no wind, and at its base lay the sixth jawbone. This one was different, smaller than the rest. Human. It had no teeth, but as I bent to lift it, I heard them. 6 voices, layered atop one another, whispering so softly, they sounded like breath brushing against my eardrum. Some called me by name. Others wept. The moment my fingers closed around the bone, everything changed. A flash, white, searing, immediate, erupted behind my eyes, not from outside, but from somewhere within. The world reeled. My stomach heaved. I fell backward into blackness and air, and screaming faces whirled past me. Familiar, but not dead, but not gone. I saw Kala again. Her eyes were hollow, yet aware. Her jaw hung askew, but she smiled as if she remembered what it was to love. I landed, not with the impact of flesh on earth, but with the weightless, numb sensation of waking up wrong. The forest was gone. The sky had returned. Gray, clouded, dim with early morning haze. Birds chirped, distant and oblivious. My backpack was there beside me, half open, no sigils, no bones, no wolf. I was alone, except not. In the trees beyond the trail, just past the first bend, something watched. I couldn't see it. Not fully. But I knew it was there, the way you know someone is standing behind you, the way shadows behave when they're not cast by anything real. And then came the sound, so soft, it might have been the wind or memory or something caught in my own breath. The bone howl. Not a single voice, but many. Not just strangers, but people I knew, people I'd lost, people I thought I'd helped, and one that hadn't spoken until now, rising through the others with impossible familiarity, my own. I turned in time to see my shadow stretch in the wrong direction,